Hey there, tonight we're diving into the world of an 1860s telegraph operator, where the truth is, these unsung maestros of Morse code were the 19th century equivalent of today's tech wizards, keeping the world connected one beep at a time. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. The sun barely nudges through the soot-streaked windows of your boarding house, rousing you from a restless slumber. Welcome to the glamour of the 1860, where your room is as snug as a sardine can, with just enough space to swing a cat, if that cat happens to be a particularly small one. Your bed is more of a suggestion than a reality, with a mattress that feels like it's stuffed with hay or maybe rocks. Who can tell, really? In the world of the telegraph operator, dawn's first light means it's time to brace yourself for a new day of darts and dashes. You're living in a time when sending a message is as revolutionary as texting from Mars would be today, though somehow it feels less glamorous in your current setting. Let's talk morning rituals, shall we? Forget about leisurely lattes or avocado toast. You're diving headfirst into a breakfast that dares the bravest of stomachs. Salt pork, hardtack, essentially a brick disguised as food, and maybe some watery coffee if you're lucky. It's a meal that would send a modern dietitian into cardiac arrest faster than you can say, kale smoothie. Now let's chat about your paycheck. You're pulling in a whopping $15 a month for your telegraph wizardry. Don't spend it all in one place, right? But hold your Snickers, because back in the day, that was enough to keep your head above water. Barely. The cost of living in a rapidly industrializing society might not have been astronomical by today's standards, but it had its challenges. Rent for your cozy little shoebox of a room runs about $2 a month, which leaves you $13 to cover food, clothing, and the occasional pint at the local pub. Luxuries like new shoes or a trip to the barber. Well, let's just say they aren't exactly budget-friendly when each costs a staggering $3. The allure of industrialization, the promise of progress, the clatter of typewriters, the hiss of steam engines. It's a time when everything is on the move, except for your career advancement, which seems stuck in Morse code hell. But let's not get too cynical. The telegraph is the Victorian internet, and you're right at the center of this buzzing hive, connecting people across vast distances with the flick of a wrist. You're the unsung hero of the communication revolution, even if the world outside your boarding house window feels miles apart from the thrilling stories that telegrams tell. As you lace up your battered boots, you wonder what the day holds. Maybe you'll get a message from Abraham Lincoln himself, or maybe it'll just be another order for a shipment of pickled herring. Either way, you're part of something big, even if it doesn't always feel like it when you're counting coppers to buy your next meal. With one last swig of that dubious coffee, it's out the door and into the thrumming heart of the city, where opportunity and grime walk hand in hand. Who knows? Maybe today's the day everything changes, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. The reality is, most days aren't about glory or grandeur. They're about surviving, and if you're lucky, thriving in an era that's as unforgiving as it is fascinating. So, straighten that cravat, take a deep breath, and step into the bustling world of the telegraph operator. You might just be sending change down the wire, even if your own life feels a little stuck. Stepping out into the cacophony of horse-drawn carriages and street vendors hawking their wares, you head towards the telegraph office. It's a short walk, but one filled with the sights and sounds of an era teetering on the brink of modernity. In your pocket, a pocket watch ticks with the precision of a time when being even a minute late could mean missing a crucial message. You're not just strolling to any old job. You're entering the nerve center of 19th century communication, where the pulse of the world is sent through wires and transformed into the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of Morse code. The telegraph office, a place where romance meets reality, where the promise of instant communication battles it out with the gritty reality of manual labor. The building itself isn't much to look at. Honestly, it could use a good scrubbing. But step inside, and you're greeted by the hum of electric energy. This is the internet of its day, a bustling hub where messages that once took weeks to cross oceans now make the journey in a matter of minutes. Let's take a moment to appreciate the wizardry of it all. Before the telegraph, sending a message across the Atlantic meant entrusting it to a ship, praying it didn't sink, and waiting weeks for a reply. It was like texting with carrier pigeons. Romantic, sure, but not exactly efficient. Now, thanks to Samuel Morse and his ingenious system, you can send a message from New York to London faster than you can say, "Barb's your uncle." But don't let the romance sweep you away. For all its revolutionary glamour, the telegraph is no magic wand. It's a beast of wires and brass, and it relies on the dexterity of operators like you to bring it to life. The room is filled with the clatter of telegraph keys, each operator hunched over their station like pianists at a concert, fingers dancing over the keys to turn thoughts into darts and dashes. Your station is as cluttered as you are skilled, papers strewn about, a half-eaten apple from yesterday languishing in the corner. You settle in, adjusting the clunky headphones that connect you to the world. And here it is, the 1860s version of texting, Morse code. Forget emojis and GIF. You're working with a binary language of darts and dashes, a series of short and long signals that, in the right hands, can convey anything from mundane business transactions to life-altering news. Morse code, for the uninitiated, is a language of brevity. With just 2 symbols, it creates words and sentences that fly down the wire faster than any horse or steam engine could dream of. A single letter might be just a dot and dash. A T is a single dash, as simple and direct as a knock on the door. An E, on the other hand, is a mere dart, the briefest whisper of a sound. But put them together, and you've got the building blocks of communication. Yet, like any language worth its salt, Morse code requires practice, skill, and a fair amount of guesswork. Context is king, and an operator's ear must be sharp to catch the subtle differences between a hurried dash and a lazy one. It's a bit like playing an instrument, and in this concert of beeps and clicks, you're a maestro of the mundane and the magnificent. As you tune into the rhythm of the office, you can't help but marvel at how this primitive technology keeps the world connected. It's a lifeline for businesses, governments, and families scattered across continents. Each message is a tiny cog in the grand machine of progress, helping to knit a disparate world into a cohesive whole. You're not just an operator. You're a vital part of a network that's reshaping society, one dot and dash at a time. But let's not romanticize too much. The telegraph may be revolutionary, but it's also a relentless taskmaster. The pressure is constant, the workload heavy, and the pay, well, let's just say it's not keeping you in the lap of luxury. You're juggling messages at a frenetic pace, deciphering codes, and relaying responses with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Mistakes are not an option. A single slip could mean disaster, a misplaced dash transforming a message of peace into one of war. No pressure, right? Still, for all its challenges, there's something thrilling about being at the heart of the action. You're privy to the world's secrets, a silent witness to history in the making. From the mundane to the momentous, each message is a thread in the tapestry of human experience, and you're the weaver, ensuring that no strand goes astray. As you sit there, fingers flying over the keys, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're part of a new age of communication, a pioneer in a field that will shape the future in ways you can scarcely imagine. It's a heady feeling, knowing that you're helping to bridge the gaps between people, turning vast distances into mere lines on a map. And so, the day goes on, each message a reminder of the power of technology to connect us all. It's a job that demands precision, patience, and a touch of poetry as you translate thoughts into a language of sound. As the afternoon sun slants through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, you take a moment to appreciate the magic of it all. But don't get too sentimental. The telegraph may be the cutting edge of its day, but it's not without its quirks and frustrations. The equipment is temperamental, the lines prone to interference, and the workload ceaseless. Yet, despite it all, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you're part of something bigger than yourself. You may be just one operator in a vast network, but you're a crucial link in the chain, keeping the world connected with each tap of the key. As the day winds down, you gather your things, your mind still buzzing with the rhythm of Morse code. The office may be closing, but the world never sleeps, and tomorrow will bring another day of challenges and triumphs. As you step out into the crisp evening air, you feel a sense of accomplishment, knowing that you've played your part in the great drama of life, connecting people across time and space with the simple power of darts and dashes. As the dusk settles and the clamor of the day fades, Your mind returns to the rhythmic symphony of darts and dashes that have been your constant companions. But before you can sink into the comfort of your lumpy mattress, let's rewind to the bustling heart of midday, a time when the telegraph office transforms into a veritable beehive of activity, buzzing with messages that could alter the course of history or simply remind someone to buy more flour. Ah, midday in the 1860. It's not just the sun that's at its peak, it's the telegraph traffic too. You've got messages zipping in from every corner of the country and beyond, from mundane missives about merchant shipments to momentous news from the battlefields of the Civil War. Your fingers are dancing across the keys like a virtuoso at Carnegie Hall. Well, if Carnegie Hall were a thing yet, that is. It's a time when every tap carries weight, and each pause is pregnant with potential. Speaking of potential, let's dig into the role of the telegraph in the 1860s social and political climate. The Civil War, raging from 1861 to 1865, was the first American conflict to be fought in the age of the telegraph. This nifty piece of technology wasn't just about sending Aunt Beatrice updates on the family farm. No, it was a game changer, a tool of war that allowed generals to communicate in real time, strategizing faster than their boots could march. For context, consider that President Lincoln himself was known to haunt the War Department's telegraph office, eagerly awaiting news from the front. The telegraph helped him stay in the loop, making decisions that could turn the tide of battle. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The image of the telegrapher as a lone hero, valiantly tapping out messages that save the day, is more myth than reality. In truth, you're more of a cog in the grand machine of industrial progress. Sure, you play a role in the drama, but you're not exactly the star of the show. Think of yourself as a supporting actor in a massive ensemble cast, each player vital but none indispensable. And then there's the economic side of things. The telegraph industry was a booming business, with companies like Western Union stringing wires across the landscape faster than you can say, manifest destiny. This communication revolution wasn't just about connecting people, it was about making money, lots of it. The cost of sending a telegram varied, but it wasn't cheap. Typically it cost a few cents per word, which adds up when you're sending messages longer than a haiku. It's a stark reminder that even in the age of progress, the almighty dollar reigns supreme. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of human nature. Here you are, part of a groundbreaking network that spans continents, yet you're still grappling with the same old problems. The equipment is finicky. The lines are prone to interference from everything from thunderstorms to, believe it or not, sunspots. Yes, sunspots. The universe has a sense of humor, it seems. And while you're busy translating the world's events into Morse code, let's not forget the very human tendency to get things wrong. A misplaced dart or dash can mean the difference between attack and retreat, which is, let's say, a rather significant discrepancy. As you sit there, tuning into the constant chatter of the office, you can't help but marvel at how this technological marvel keeps the world connected. Each message is a tiny cog in the grand machine of progress, helping to knit a disparate world into a cohesive whole. You're not just an operator. You're a vital part of a network that's reshaping society, one dart and dash at a time. And while it's easy to get swept away by the romance of it all, let's not forget the grime beneath the glamour. The telegraph may be revolutionary, but it's also a relentless taskmaster. The pressure is constant, the workload heavy, and the pay, well, let's just say it's not keeping you in the lap of luxury. You're juggling messages at a frenetic pace, deciphering codes and relaying responses with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Mistakes are not an option. A single slip could mean disaster, a misplaced dash transforming a message of peace into one of war. No pressure, right? Still, for all its challenges, there's something thrilling about being at the heart of the action. You're privy to the world's secrets, a silent witness to history in the making. From the mundane to the momentous, each message is a thread in the tapestry of human experience, and you're the weaver, ensuring that no strand goes astray. As you sit there, fingers flying over the keys, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're part of a new age of communication, a pioneer in a field that will shape the future in ways you can scarcely imagine. It's a heady feeling, knowing that you're helping to bridge the gaps between people, turning vast distances into mere lines on a map. And so, the day goes on, each message a reminder of the power of technology to connect us all. It's a job that demands precision, patience, and a touch of poetry as you translate thoughts into a language of sound. As the afternoon sun slants through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, you take a moment to appreciate the magic of it all. But don't get too sentimental. The telegraph may be the cutting edge of its day, but it's not without its quirks and frustrations. The equipment is temperamental, the lines prone to interference, and the workload ceaseless. Yet despite it all, there's a certain satisfaction in knowing that you're part of something bigger than yourself. You may be just one operator in a vast network, but you're a crucial link in the chain, keeping the world connected with each tap of the key. As the day winds down, you gather your things, your mind still buzzing with the rhythm of Morse code. The office may be closing, but the world never sleeps, and tomorrow will bring another day of challenges and triumphs. As you step out into the crisp evening air, you feel a sense of accomplishment, knowing that you've played your part in the great drama of life, connecting people across time and space with the simple power of darts and dashes. As you step into the crisp evening air, your mind still buzzing with the rhythm of darts and dashes, you can't help but think about the sprawling web of wires that stretches unseen above the city. It's the 1860s version of a global network. No Wi-Fi, no fiber optics, but a massive leap forward nonetheless. Who needs a worldwide web when you've got a worldwide wire? Now, let's talk about how this marvel of technology, the telegraph, transformed global business faster than you can say economic revolution. Before this, trading was like playing a game of telephone. By the time goods arrived, the original message was distorted beyond recognition. The telegraph changed all that. Imagine the thrill of a New York stockbroker sending a trade order to London and receiving a confirmation the same day. It was as if someone had handed the business world a shiny new set of wings. But hold your applause. The telegraph wasn't all ticker-tape parades and booming profits. It had its quirks, and operators like you were on the front line, dealing with them. Technical glitches. Oh, you bet. Sometimes the lines would hum along nicely, and other times they'd have all the reliability of a soggy piece of string. And let's not forget those cryptic messages. Deciphering a telegram could be like trying to read Shakespeare through a kaleidoscope. Every operator had their share of "what on earth does this mean?" moments. Consider this. The price of sending a telegram back then was roughly a few cents per word, varying by distance and urgency. Want to tell Aunt Mildred about your new job? Keep it concise, unless you're ready to part with a week's wages. This isn't Twitter, there's no room for fluff. It's all about brevity and urgency. A telegram was the original TLDR, and while you might fancy yourself a pioneer in this wired wilderness, there's no escaping the fact that this technology made the world smaller in more ways than one. Take international diplomacy, for instance. The telegraph turned it into a high-speed chess game. Governments could now negotiate treaties and declare war with the speed of thought. Of course, that also meant they could make blunders at the speed of thought too. A misinterpreted message could have statesmen reaching for their sabers. But let's not get too bogged down in the grandiosity. The real magic of the telegraph was how it brought people together. Imagine receiving a telegram from a loved one across the ocean, intimate words traveling thousands of miles in mere minutes. It was nothing short of miraculous. The telegraph wasn't just a tool for business tycoons and political bigwigs. It was a lifeline for families, a thread connecting hearts over vast distances. Yet, for all its connectivity, the telegraph had its limits. Those wires couldn't carry the nuance of a voice or the warmth of a handwritten letter. It was a language of cold efficiency, perfect for stock prices and military orders, but not so much for tender sentiments. You might say it was the Victorian era's version of texting, K instead of OK. And just when you think you've got a handle on this whole telegraph operator gig, there comes the inevitable technical hiccup. Maybe it's a storm disrupting the lines, or a sunspot throwing your signals into chaos. That's right, sunspots. Who knew solar flares had a vendetta against communication? It's enough to make a seasoned operator like yourself throw up your hands in exasperation. But you're not alone in this. Operators everywhere face these challenges, forming a camaraderie of sorts, a brotherhood bound by the wire. It's a tough job, but someone's got to keep the world talking, even if it means deciphering messages that seem to have been written in Martian. As you head home, boots clicking against the cobblestones, you ponder the absurdities and triumphs of your day. The telegraph is a beast, sure, but you've helped tame it, if only for a moment. And tomorrow, as sure as the sun rises, you'll be back at it, a maestro of the Morse, conducting the world's conversations one tap at a time. With each step, you feel the weight of history on your shoulders. You're part of something monumental, an invisible web that spans continents, shrinking the world with every message sent. It's a heady feeling, knowing that in your own small way, you're changing the world, one dart and dash at a time. And as you finally sink into your lumpy mattress, the hum of the telegraph still echoing in your ears, you can't help but dream of what tomorrow will bring. And as you drift into that lovely oblivion called sleep, let's not forget the symphony of darts and dashes still echoing in your mind. In the grand theater of history, you've been an extra in a production that changed the world. Now, let's pull back the curtain on the telegraph's encore, the legacy it left, and how it shaped the world we live in today. First off, the telegraph was the rock star that kicked off the communication revolution. It was the Beatles of its time, except instead of catchy tunes, it delivered messages that could topple governments or sell out stocks. It laid the foundation for everything from the telephone to the internet. Alexander Graham Bell didn't just wake up one day and invent the telephone. He was riffing off the telegraph's greatest hits. The telegraph taught us how to transmit information across distances quickly and efficiently, a lesson that Bell took to heart in 1876 when he made that first historic call. "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you," he said. That was the first phone call, a bit mundane, sure. But hey, it's not like he was going to launch into a Shakespearean monologue. Now, fast forward to the digital age, and you'll see how the telegraph's fingerprints are everywhere. Take texting, for instance. It's the modern equivalent of the telegram, except now you can send a picture of your cat along with your text. Emojis. They're just the 21st century version of Morse code, symbols conveying emotions and ideas without words. And email. Well, it's just a souped-up version of the telegram. Instead of a few cents per word, you're dealing with seconds per message. The speed and brevity that the telegraph brought to communication are alive and well, tucked into our pockets. But let's not get too nostalgic about the good old days of the telegraph, because those days were anything but good for your average operator. Remember, you were pulling in $1.15 a month, which might sound like monopoly money now, but back then it was barely enough to keep you in shoes and hardtack. And while we romanticize the idea of the telegrapher as a lone cowboy, riding the wires and saving the day, the reality was more desk jockey than dashing hero. Yet, for all its cold efficiency and economic reality, the telegraph had a soul. It was a tool that connected people in a way that was unprecedented. Before the telegraph, news traveled at the speed of a horse or a ship, which is to say, not very fast at all. But with the telegraph, you could share a piece of your life with someone miles away, almost instantly. It shrank the world, knitting together distant places with its electromagnetic threads. But let's be honest, the telegraph wasn't without its drama. Messages could get lost, garbled, or delayed, and not all operators were the virtuosos they thought they were. A misplaced dart or dash could turn "I love you" into "I loathe you," which, needless to say, could lead to some awkward explanations. And while the telegraph was the backbone of business and politics, it was also a gossip's playground. Imagine the thrill of intercepting a celebrity scandal or a juicy piece of political intrigue. Now, let's talk about the broader picture, the part where we zoom out and see how the telegraph fits into the tapestry of technological advancement. It was a disruptor, a game changer, a paradigm shift. Pick your buzzword. It took the world from localized economies to a global marketplace. Suddenly, you're not just competing with the shop next door. You're competing with shops across the country, even across the ocean. And this global communication wasn't just a boon for business. It was a catalyst for cultural exchange, for the spread of ideas, and yes, for a few misunderstandings along the way. As we wrap up this day in the life of a telegraph operator, let's not forget that it's a day that echoes into the future. The telegraph's legacy isn't just in the technology it inspired, but in the way it changed our perception of distance and time. It taught us that information could be as fluid as mercury, slipping through wires and across borders. It's the great-grandparent of every instant message, every video call, every live stream. So, as you finally settle into the embrace of sleep, remember that you've been part of something monumental. In a world where everything is instant, and patience is a relic of a bygone era, the Telegraph reminds us of the monumental leap we took from the plodding pace of the past to the frenetic pace of the present. It's a legacy of connection, a testament to human ingenuity, and a reminder that sometimes the simplest tools, the darts and dashes, can create the most profound changes. And who knows, maybe tomorrow, as the sun rises and the world wakes up, you'll be ready to tap back into the rhythm of history, one dart and dash at a time. Sweet dreams. Operator, the world will still be waiting when you wake up. Bethlehem in 4 BCE wasn't exactly the quaint little town that Christmas carols would have you believe. In reality, it was more like an ancient version of a rest stop at the crossroads of the Middle Eastern trade routes. Think less, O little town, and more welcome to the hustle and bustle. With a population hovering somewhere between 300 and 1,000 people, this was a village where everyone knew everyone else's business, which was mostly trading, farming, and trying to make ends meet under the watchful eye of the Romans. You see, Bethlehem wasn't just some backwater dot on the map. It was strategically positioned as a trade junction, nestled about 6 miles south of Jerusalem. This location made it a pretty busy place, especially since it was on the route that connected Egypt to the eastern reaches of the empire. Merchants, travelers, and maybe even the odd Roman soldier would pass through, bringing with them goods, gossip, and a lot of noise. Forget about a silent night. Bethlehem was more likely to be filled with the sounds of bartering, the clatter of hooves, and the occasional frustrated shout from someone trying to secure a decent price on a jug of wine. Now, let's talk about that infamous Roman census. This was not your typical head count. The Romans, ever the efficient administrators, want to know exactly who they were taxing, because let's face it, their empire didn't fund itself. So, they ordered everyone to return to their ancestral homes. For the people of Bethlehem, this meant an influx of relatives they hadn't seen since last Passover, all crammed into a village that was already bustling on a good day. Inns were bursting at the seams, and it's safe to say that the concept of personal space was a foreign one at that time. Speaking of inns, kick out that image of a cozy little bed and breakfast. These were more like ancient motels, basic, crowded, and probably a bit smelly. Guests could expect to share space with strangers, livestock, and whatever critters had decided to hitch a ride in the hay. Overcrowded would be an understatement. The reality was that even a wealthy traveler would struggle to find a decent place to sleep, let alone a carpenter and his very pregnant wife. The economic scene in Bethlehem was equally as gritty. The town's small population meant that everyone had a role to play, whether it was farming, trading, or crafting. The economy was a delicate balancing act, and the Roman taxes didn't help. Locals had to fork over a portion of their hard-earned goods or money to fund the empire's roads and armies. Basically, the ancient equivalent of paying for pothole repairs with a side of imperial expansion. And while we're on the subject of money, let's talk numbers. A denarius, the standard Roman silver coin, was roughly equivalent to a day's labor for a common worker. Imagine working all day under the hot sun and being paid just enough to buy a modest meal and maybe a cup of watered-down wine. It was a life of subsistence, where every coin counted, and there was little room for luxuries. Now, the romantic allure of that first Christmas lies in its simplicity and serenity, but those were in short supply. Bethlehem was a town bursting at the seams with people trying to find a spot to lay their heads, food to fill their bellies, and maybe a moment of peace in a chaotic world. The streets were anything but quiet, and the night was filled with the sounds of a village straining under the weight of its guests. In short, the reality of Bethlehem was as gritty and complex as any modern city, just with more donkeys and fewer streetlights. So, as you picture that first Christmas, remember it wasn't all calm and bright. The real story is one of a bustling, noisy village, full of people just trying to get by under the watchful eye of Rome. And maybe, just maybe, that makes the story even more remarkable, because in the midst of all that chaos, something extraordinary was happening. But for now, let's hold that thought. The real Bethlehem was a far cry from the picturesque seen on your grandmother's mantle, and that's just the beginning of the story. Now, let's dive into the heart of the legend, the manger scene. Ah, yes, the iconic tableau that graces countless Christmas cards and nativity sets with its angelic glow and serene faces. But hold on to your halos, because reality was far less picturesque. For starters, let's tackle the myth of the stable. The Gospels don't actually mention a stable. In fact, no room at the inn likely didn't mean Mary and Joseph were turned away by a grumpy innkeeper. The term translated as inn in the ancient texts is more accurately guest room. So, what was the deal? Picture a typical first-century Judean home, a single-room dwelling, often with a guest room attached. This was the Airbnb of the ancient world, minus the service charge. During the census, every nook and cranny of these homes would be crammed with relatives and travelers. Think of it as a family reunion that nobody asked for, where personal space was just a rumor. When the guest room filled up, the overflow crashed in the main living area, which sometimes doubled as a stable. Yes, the animals were often brought inside at night. Why? Because livestock was a precious commodity, and you wouldn't want your prized donkey wandering off or becoming a midnight snack for a hungry predator. Besides, the body heat from the animals provided a little extra warmth during chilly nights. Forget central heating. This was survival ingenuity at its finest. Now, let's address that manger. Far from being a romantic prop, a manger was a practical piece of furniture, a feeding trough, usually hewn from stone or carved out of wood. Fancy, right? It was sturdy, sure, but probably not the first choice for a bassinet. Yet here it was, pressed into service due to cramped conditions. Archaeological evidence from the era shows these mangers were common fixtures in homes, supporting the notion that no room at the inn meant no room in the guest quarters. And what about the idea of a cave? Well, in the rocky landscapes of the region, caves were often utilized as makeshift shelters or storage spaces. Some scholars suggest that Mary and Joseph might have found refuge in one of these natural shelters, which would have been used as a stable or part of a home. It's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Caves were practical and available, the ancient equivalent of popping up a tent in your backyard when guests overstay their welcome. As for the silent night, let's be real. A newborn in a room filled with people and animals. Silence was probably a luxury no one could afford. Factor in the bleats, brays, and general chatter, and you've got a symphony of chaos rather than a lullaby. So, while the romanticized manger scene has its charm, the reality was a bit more grounded, literally and figuratively. Survival was the name of the game, and ingenuity was key. In this gritty setting, the birth of a child becomes all the more extraordinary, not for its serene beauty, but for its triumph over adversity. Yet, for all its starkness, there's something profoundly human about this story. It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of grand moments, but a collection of small, everyday victories. And as we peel back the layers of legend, the reality we uncover is one of resilience and resourcefulness, a testament to the human spirit's ability to find hope in the most humble of places. As we continue this journey through ancient Bethlehem, remember, behind every myth is a story waiting to be told. The truth may not always be as polished as the legend, but it's often where the real fascination lies. And with that, let's keep pressing on, for there's still much more to explore in this tale of history and humanity. Now, with the backdrop of our bustling, donkey-filled Bethlehem in mind, let's pivot to the political scene, because if there ever was a time when politics made life feel like a perpetual tightrope walk, it was during the reign of Herod the Great. Picture a ruler so paranoid and ruthless that even Macbeth would take notes. Herod wasn't just sitting comfortably on his throne, he was gripping it with white knuckles and a wary eye on anyone who dared to look at it too long. Herod was Rome's guy in Judea, and he had the dubious honor of ruling from 37 BCE to 4 BCE. His nickname, the Great, wasn't because he was a nice guy. No, Herod got that title for his massive building projects, like the expansion of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, a feat of engineering that would leave even modern architects in awe. But don't let the marble and mortar fool you. Herod's reign was built on a foundation of paranoia. The man had a knack for seeing conspiracies in every corner. He executed 3 of his own sons, suspecting them of plotting against him. Imagine the family dinners, probably not a lot of toasts to absent friends. And it wasn't just the sons. Herod's wife Miriamne met a grim fate, too, along with her mother. It's fair to say that Herod saw keeping the peace as an extreme sport, with his own family members often as the collateral damage. Now, you might wonder why Herod was so jumpy. The answer, of course, is Rome. Herod was a client king, which meant he owed his crown to the Roman Empire, specifically to Augustus, the emperor. This relationship was a classic case of keep your friends close and your enemies closer, with Herod always trying to balance Roman interests against local Jewish concerns. If Judea was a pressure cooker, Herod was the guy trying to keep the lid on, even if it meant letting off steam through ruthless purges. The Romans loved efficiency, and they expected their client kings to keep their territories in line. But Judea was a volatile blend of cultures and faiths, and Herod's heavy-handed rule did little to soothe tensions. He was caught in the crossfire between appeasing his Roman patrons and quelling uprisings from his subjects who weren't exactly thrilled about Roman tax collectors knocking on their doors. Speaking of taxes, let's talk economics. Herod's grandiose projects weren't funded by wishes and dreams. They were funded by the sweat and toil of his subjects, whose taxes filled the coffers that paid for this architectural splendor. The annual tribute was a substantial burden. For a common Judean laborer, a day's wage was a denarius, while taxes could eat up a third of a family's annual income. Imagine working all year and seeing a chunk of your earnings go up in literal smoke, incense rising from the temple you funded but might never visit. This fiscal pressure created a simmering resentment, a perfect breeding ground for messianic hopes. The Jews of Judea longed for a savior, a Messiah who would liberate them from Roman rule and restore their fortunes. Herod, aware of this undercurrent, kept a close eye on potential threats to his power, which only fed his notorious paranoia. The idea of a new king, born in Bethlehem, was enough to send him into a tailspin, as the gospel account of the massacre of the innocents suggests. While historical evidence of this event is scant, the narrative captures Herod's brutal reputation and the fear that gripped the region. In this climate of suspicion and subjugation, the birth of a child in Bethlehem takes on a different hue. It's not just a quaint nativity scene. It's a story set against a backdrop of oppression and survival. The Roman Empire's shadow loomed large, and Herod's iron grip left little room for dissent. Yet, in the midst of this tension, whispers of hope echoed through the narrow streets and crowded homes of Judea. A messianic birth wasn't just a story of divine intervention, but a beacon of resistance against the powers that be. In the grand scheme of Roman politics, Judea was a small, often overlooked province, a footnote in the annals of the empire. But to its inhabitants, it was the center of a spiritual and cultural struggle, a place where faith and identity were constantly tested. Herod, for all his might and terror, couldn't quash the dreams of his subjects. The idea of a Messiah was more than a prophecy. It was a promise of redemption, a flicker of light in a world ruled by tyranny and fear. As we unravel this historical tapestry, the story of Bethlehem becomes more than just a tale of humble beginnings. It's a lens through which we see the complex interplay of power, faith, and human resilience. Herod's reign was marked by paranoia and brutality, but it also set the stage for a narrative that would transcend time and geography. The political climate of Judea under Roman rule wasn't just a backdrop. It was an integral part of the story, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can find a way to shine through. So, as we venture deeper into this ancient world, remember, history is rarely neat and tidy, but it's always full of surprises. The reality behind the legends is often more compelling than the myths themselves. And with Herod's story as a cornerstone, the tale of a messianic birth unfolds not just as a religious narrative, but as a testament to the enduring spirit of a people yearning for freedom. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and there's still much more to explore in this saga of intrigue, faith, and human endurance. And speaking of surprises, let's dive into the social tapestry of ancient Bethlehem, a village where societal norms were as tangled as your holiday lights after a year in the attic. You see, Bethlehem wasn't just a geographical blip on the map. It was a hotbed of cultural and social dynamics that would make any modern family gathering look like a picnic. First up, let's talk shepherds. Now, before you get all misty-eyed picturing serene pastoral scenes, let's set the record straight. Shepherds in ancient Judea weren't the peaceful, harp-strumming figures of nativity plays. Nope, they were the rough-around-the-edges, night-shift workers of their day. These guys were the ultimate freelancers, spending long nights under the stars, keeping one eye on their flocks and the other on any wolves or bandits with a taste for mutton. Yet, despite their gritty lifestyle, shepherds held a peculiar symbolic significance. These were the original underdogs, representing humility and the common folk. In a society obsessed with lineage and status, where your family tree was as important as your olive oil supply, shepherds were the relatable everymen. The angels appearing to them first in the nativity story isn't just heartwarming. It's a narrative that flips social hierarchies on their heads. It's like having your local barrister be the first to know about the royal baby, unexpected and delightful. Now, speaking of status, let's not forget the importance of family lineage in Bethlehem. In ancient Judea, your family name was your calling card. It dictated your social standing, your marriage prospects, and in many ways your future. Imagine the pressure of a family reunion where everyone's keeping tabs on whose oxen are the fattest and whose kids are marrying up. Forget keeping up with the Kardashians. This was about keeping up with the Herodians. But here's the twist. While lineage was crucial, reality often had a way of shaking things up. The census, ordered by the Romans, forced people to return to their ancestral homes, upending the social order and cramming extended families into already overflowing houses. Imagine the stress of hosting your entire extended family for the holidays, but instead of a cozy turkey dinner, you're serving whatever you can scrounge together. And yes, Uncle Mordecai is still arguing about who owes whom a denarius from the last Passover. In this tight-knit community, societal expectations were as rigid as a Roman legionnaire's march. Honor thy family, be fruitful and multiply, and for heaven's sake, don't bring shame to your clan. But life in Bethlehem was far from idyllic. The harsh economic conditions, coupled with the ever-present Roman taxes, meant that many families lived on the edge of survival. The gap between societal ideals and everyday reality was as wide as the Jordan River. And then there's the religious scene. Judaism in the 1st century was diverse, with various sects interpreting the Torah in myriad ways. The religious practices in Bethlehem were deeply intertwined with daily life, from dietary laws to Sabbath observance. Yet the presence of Roman paganism added another layer of complexity. Picture trying to maintain your kosher diet while the Romans throw a festival complete with roasted pork. Talk about a cultural clash. The tension between Jewish customs and Roman rule was palpable. Religion wasn't just a matter of faith. It was an identity, a form of resistance against cultural assimilation. The strict observance of Jewish laws was not just about spirituality, but a statement of defiance, a way to preserve a community's soul in the face of an empire that demanded conformity. In this whirlwind of political, social, and religious dynamics, Bethlehem was more than just a birthplace. It was a microcosm of a world in transition. The story of that first Christmas, nestled within the broader narrative of Judea under Roman rule, isn't just about a manger and a star. It's about the grit and grace of ordinary people navigating extraordinary times. As we peel back the layers of history, one thing becomes clear. The allure of the Christmas story lies not just in its divine mystery, but in its human reality. It's a tale of perseverance, of finding light in the darkest of places, and of hope that refuses to be extinguished, no matter how oppressive the circumstances. So, as we journey through this ancient land, let's remember that behind every myth is a story waiting to shine. And in Bethlehem, that story is as rich and complex as the human spirit itself. And now, as we look at how the Christmas story has woven itself into the fabric of centuries, let's start with those early Christian writers and artists. The real headline act behind the scenes of this enduring narrative. These folks had a knack for storytelling that would make any Hollywood scriptwriter tip their hat. They took the raw material of a humble birth in a dusty village and turned it into a blockbuster saga that would outlast empires. The Gospel writers, particularly Matthew and Luke, were the first to lay the groundwork. Their accounts were less about fact-checking and more about conveying theological truth. Matthew, for instance, wasn't just reciting a birth announcement, it was weaving a tale that placed Jesus squarely in Jewish prophetic tradition. By tracing Jesus' lineage back to Abraham and David, he was basically saying, hey, this kid is the real deal, your long-awaited Messiah. Luke, on the other hand, gave us the shepherds and angels, painting a picture of divine intervention that was accessible to the common folk. It's the kind of narrative versatility that makes Shakespeare look like a one-trick pony. Fast forward a few centuries, and we see the story gaining layers, like a snowball rolling downhill. The early Christian church, while hammering out creeds and doctrines, found that art was a powerful tool for spreading the message. Enter the nativity scenes, those intricate tableaux that started popping up in churches round the 4th century. This was visual storytelling at its finest, an ancient PowerPoint presentation that communicated complex theology to an audience that might not read Latin, but could certainly appreciate a good visual. And let's not forget our old pal St. Francis of Assisi, who in 1223 staged the first live nativity scene. He brought the Christmas story to life with real animals and people, turning it into an interactive experience, kind of like the medieval version of an IMAX film. Francis was onto something. By bringing the story into the tangible world, he made it relatable and immediate, a strategy that turned tradition into something dynamic and participatory. As the story spread, it got dressed up in the trappings of various cultures. By the time we get to the Middle Ages, Christmas had evolved into a tapestry of pagan and Christian traditions, a mashup of winter solstice celebrations and the birth of Christ. The Yule logs, mistletoe, and feasting were all nods to pre-Christian customs, but they were now rebranded under the banner of Christmas. It was a savvy marketing move, a way to bring people on board by sprinkling a little familiarity into the mix. The Renaissance period saw a resurgence of nativity art, with artists like Botticelli and Caravaggio bringing the story to life with a flair for drama and detail. These works weren't just decorative, they were theological statements, each brushstroke a testament to divine mystery. The paintings and sculptures were not only meant to inspire awe, but to evoke a sense of sacred intimacy that transcended the mundane. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all these layers, the core of the story, the humble birth, the shepherds, the star, remained remarkably intact. That speaks volumes about the narrative's resilience and adaptability. It was a story that could be molded to fit the times while retaining its essence, a feat not unlike trying to keep your Christmas tree looking fresh well into January. But let's take a step back and ask, why does this story persist with such tenacity? Why does it continue to capture imaginations across cultures and continents? The answer might lie in its universal themes. The Christmas story is one of hope, redemption, and the triumph of the ordinary over the extraordinary. It's a narrative that resonates, because it taps into a fundamental human longing for light in the darkness, and the belief that humble beginnings can lead to great things. In modern times, the story has taken on new dimensions, courtesy of everything from Charles Dickens to Coca-Cola. Dickens, A Christmas Carol, reimagined the holiday as a time for charity and goodwill, while the iconic Coca-Cola, Santa turned the once austere St. Nicholas into the jolly, red-suited figure we know today. Each adaptation reflects the values and concerns of its era, adding new layers to the story without erasing its core. Yet, amidst all this evolution, the romanticized version, the serene nativity scene, the silent night, continues to captivate. Perhaps it's because, in a world rife with chaos and complexity, there's comfort in the simplicity of the story. It offers a respite, a moment of reflection on what truly matters. It's a reminder that even in the most challenging of circumstances, there's room for hope and transformation. So, as we wrap up this historical journey through ancient Bethlehem and beyond, let's remember that the allure of the Christmas story lies not just in its historical roots, but in its capacity to adapt and endure. It's a testament to the power of narrative, a story that has been shaped and reshaped through the ages, yet remains as compelling today as it was 2 millennia ago. And as we gather around our modern hearths, be they digital or otherwise, let's take a moment to appreciate the journey of this tale, from a bustling Judean village to the far reaches of the globe. It's a story that, much like history itself, is always in the making, a dynamic tapestry of faith, hope, and humanity that continues to unfold, one Christmas at a time. In the shadow of the mighty mountains that today we call Eastern Turkey, the ancient Urartians were putting the extra in extraordinary long before it was cool. These folks were the architects of an empire that stretched its muscles across the rugged lands from the 9th to the 6th century BCE. They didn't just build a kingdom, they carved it out of rock, literally, with a penchant for monumental temples that would make your local cathedral blush. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To truly appreciate the Urartians' flair for the dramatic, we need to dig a little deeper into the geographic sprawl of their empire. The Urartian kingdom, also known by the more tongue-twisting name of the Kingdom of Van, we'll stick with Urartu for sanity's sake, boasted a reach that could rival even the most ambitious of ancient empires. At its peak, the Urartian territory sprawled over approximately 200,000 square kilometers. That's right, enough land to fit modern countries like Greece or Uganda. This was no small patch of earth. The heart of their kingdom was nestled around Lake Van, a saline soda lake that's as salty as your ex's Instagram after a breakup. From there, their influence stretched out to encompass parts of modern Armenia, Iran, and even as far as northern Iraq. Now, what do you do when you've got all this land and a penchant for grandeur? You build, of course, and the Urartians were nothing if not ambitious builders. They constructed fortresses and temples with a flair that screamed power and stability, or at least whispered it in a very convincing manner. Take Iribuni Fortress, for example, founded by King Arjishti I in 782 BCE. This wasn't just a military stronghold. It was a statement, a sprawling complex with walls that soared to heights that would have left the most intrepid ancient climbers clutching their sandals. The fortress itself was part of the Urartian ambition to not just control, but to impress, to leave a mark on the landscape that said, "We were here, and we meant business." And then there were the temples. Oh, the temples. These were the real showstoppers. The Urartians, it seems, had a taste for the divine that was matched only by their love of a good party. Their temples were dedicated to a pantheon of gods with names that sounded like someone sneezed while typing. Haldi, Tesheba, and Shavini, to name a few. Haldi, the chief deity, was their top billing, akin to Zeus or Odin, but with a bit more stone-chiseling action. The temples dedicated to these deities were often grand affairs, with intricate carvings and imposing designs that made it clear they took their worship seriously, or at least wanted their neighbors to think so. But let's not romanticize too much. For all their architectural prowess, the Urartians were not immune to the ancient world's version of bureaucratic chaos. You see, managing an empire with a pantheon of gods is no easy feat. It's like trying to organize a family reunion with 100 opinionated relatives, each with their own demands and preferences. You need a spreadsheet the size of the Rosetta Stone just to keep track of which god needed which offering on which day. And really, who can pronounce these names without a linguistic degree? It's no wonder the Urartians might have had a bit of a divine identity crisis now and then. The reality for the Urartians, as with many ancient empires, was that their glory was not without its headaches. They had to contend with rival kingdoms, like the Assyrians, who were always more than willing to crash the party with their own brand of destruction. And then there were the logistical nightmares of managing such a vast territory. Think of it as the ancient world's version of managing a multinational corporation, but without the convenience of email, teleconferences, or even decent roads. The Urartians had to rely on good old-fashioned messengers, who probably spent more time on horseback than in their own beds. As for the common folk, they lived in the shadow of these grand temples and fortresses, likely spending their days farming, herding, and occasionally scratching their heads at the whims of their rulers and their guards. The Urartian economy was largely agrarian, with a strong emphasis on irrigation, which was crucial given the region's rather dry climate. It took a lot of effort to coax crops from the earth, and one can only imagine the collective groan of the peasantry whenever a new temple was announced, knowing full well who would be providing the manpower. In summary, the rise of the Urartian kingdom was as much a testament to human ambition as it was to the sheer tenacity required to keep such an empire running. They left behind a legacy of architectural brilliance and a pantheon of gods that still baffles historians and linguists alike. So next time you're struggling to assemble that IKEA bookshelf, spare a thought for the Urartians. They didn't just build, they conquered, they worshipped, and they left behind a history as rocky and resilient as the mountains they called home. So, while the Urartians were busy playing architectural Tetris with their temples and fortresses, their religious practices were spinning a yarn of myth and ritual that would make even the most seasoned binge-watcher sit up and take notice. If you think modern religion is complex, try wrapping your head around the Urartian pantheon, a celestial soap opera where gods were less about divine grace and more about divine drama. At the heart of this cosmic cast was Haldi, the head honcho of the Urartian gods, whose temple antics could rival those of Zeus himself. Picture Haldi as the ultimate deity with a penchant for grandiosity that would put any Instagram influencer to shame. His temples weren't just places of worship. They were the ancient equivalent of luxury real estate, complete with high ceilings, intricate stone carvings, and all the divine clout one could muster. It wasn't just about the real estate value, though. Haldi's temples were political statements, a testament to the kingdom's might and its divine right to rule, basically their way of saying, "Look at us, we've got the gods on speed dial." Of course, Haldi didn't hog the celestial limelight all by himself. The Urartians had a whole pantheon of gods, each with their own quirks and specialities. Take Sheba, the god of storms and war, who probably would have made quite a formidable HR manager with his knack for conflict resolution or creating conflict, depending on his mood. Then there was Shivini, the sun god, whose daily routine of crossing the sky would eventually become the inspiration for every overworked commuter's dream of a 9-to-5 job. With a lineup like this, it's no surprise the Urartians had their hands full trying to keep these divine egos in check. Managing this celestial circus was not just a matter of religious duty, but a full-time job that required a priesthood as adept at political maneuvering as they were at chanting hymns. Speaking of priests, these guys were the real power brokers of the Urartian realm, the ancient world's equivalent of corporate lobbyists. They were the ones who kept the gods appeased, ensuring the divine balance was maintained through a series of rituals that would make even the most elaborate modern-day ceremonies look like a simple handshake. Sacrifices were a staple of these rituals, with everything from livestock to lavish feasts offered up to keep the gods on side. And let's be honest, who hasn't felt the urge to sacrifice a few office supplies to appease the tech gods when the Wi-Fi goes down? These sacrifices weren't just about feeding the gods, though. They were a public spectacle, a chance for the Urartian elite to show off their wealth and power. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes gala dinner where the guest list included not just the who's who of Urartu, but also the deities themselves. The economic implications of these rituals were significant, too. A single feast could consume enough resources to feed an entire village for weeks. Talk about a budget blowout. But what about the common folk, you ask? Well, they had their own smaller-scale rituals, often centered around the agricultural calendar. These were the grassroots gatherings where communities came together to ensure a good harvest or to seek protection from those pesky storms Sheba might have been whipping up. It was a bit like the ancient version of a neighborhood potluck, except instead of arguing over who brought the best casserole, they were trying to ensure their crops didn't fail. And let's not forget the role of divination in all this. The Urartians were big on trying to read the future, whether through the entrails of sacrificed animals or the patterns in the stars. It was a celestial version of a magic 8-ball, and with stakes as high as theirs, you can bet they took these predictions seriously. Who needs a stock market forecast when you've got divine insight, right? Now, while all this sounds like a rollicking good time, let's not get carried away with the romance of it all. The harsh reality was that these religious practices were as much about control as they were about faith. By keeping the populace focused on divine appeasement, the elite maintained their grip on power, ensuring that both the gods and the commoners remained in their rightful places. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required as much political savvy as it did spiritual devotion. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about office politics or the chaos of a holiday party, spare a thought for the Urartians. They were playing a game of divine diplomacy that makes our modern-day dramas look like child's play. With gods as capricious as theirs, it's a wonder they managed to keep it all together as long as they did. But that's a tale for another day, as we dive deeper into the world of Urartu and unravel the threads of an empire built on faith, stone, and a whole lot of divine intrigue. Now, as we dig into the sacred texts and inscriptions left by our ancient Urartian friends, let's remember that these aren't just dusty relics from a forgotten era. They're more like the ancient world's Twitter feed, offering a glimpse into the daily grind of balancing divine appeasement with earthly obligations. Imagine carving your tweets into stone. Talk about commitment. The Urartians, with their flair for the dramatic, weren't shy about documenting their devotion to the gods. These inscriptions were more than mere religious graffiti. They were the kingdom's press releases, carved meticulously into temple walls, fortresses, and even cliffs. Picture this. King Menuer of Urartu, around the 8th century BCE, commissioning a rock-face announcement of his latest divine-sponsored triumph. It was like having your achievements etched into the side of Mount Rushmore, only with more guards and fewer presidents. These texts weren't just for show. They laid out the divine expectations in excruciating detail, offering a roadmap for the Urartians' spiritual journey and, more crucially, their economic responsibilities. You see, worshipping wasn't just a matter of lighting a few candles and calling it a day. No, the Urartian guards demanded tribute, and they had expensive tastes. Think of it as the ancient version of a never-ending subscription service. Forget Netflix. This was Divineflix, with a subscription fee that could bankrupt a small village. The common folks had to cough up resources like grain, livestock, and even labor. It was the spiritual equivalent of taxes, and just like today's IRS, the guards didn't let you off easy. Let's put it in perspective. Estimates suggest that anywhere from 10 to 20% of a farmer's produce could be demanded as tribute, and we're not talking about a friendly neighborhood bake sale. This was serious business, with temple authorities keeping meticulous records to ensure no sheep went unaccounted for. These tributes weren't just offerings. They were a vital part of the Urartian economy. Temples became economic powerhouses, accumulating wealth and resources that rivaled the coffers of the kingdom itself. Picture your local church doubling as the central bank, but with a lot more incense and a side of divine intervention. The priests weren't just spiritual guides. They were the financial managers of Urartu, juggling the books to keep both the guards and the state satisfied. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. The economic burden of faith was heavier than a lead-lined chariot. For the average Urartian peasant, this meant long hours in the fields, knowing that a significant chunk of their harvest would end up on the altar rather than their dinner table. It was a hard pill to swallow, especially when a bad year could leave families struggling to make ends meet. But such was the price of divine favor, and for the Urartians, it was a price worth paying to keep their celestial patrons pleased. And what about those inscriptions, you ask? Well, they served a dual purpose. Not only were they a record of devotion, but they also acted as a constant reminder of the divine order. It was like having the 10 Commandments tattooed on your forearm, no forgetting who's in charge. These texts were peppered with accounts of victories attributed to the guards' favor, reinforcing the idea that success was a divine gift, not just the result of hard work or strategic genius. However, the myth of divine benevolence often masked the grittier reality. While the elite basked in the glow of temple ceremonies, the common folk toiled under the weight of these expectations. It was a delicate dance of power and piety, where the line between faith and exploitation blurred like a watercolor in the rain. The Urartian leadership knew how to wield religion as a tool of control, leveraging the fear of divine retribution to maintain their grip on power. But let's not dismiss the allure of these myths too quickly. After all, the idea of guards watching over you, guiding your hand in battle and harvest, held a certain romantic appeal. It was a narrative that offered comfort and a sense of purpose, even if the price was steep. The Urartians, like many before and after them, were willing to pay that price for the promise of divine protection. So, as we continue to unravel the tapestry of Urartian society, let's keep in mind that these sacred texts and inscriptions were more than just words carved in stone. They were the lifeblood of a complex system that intertwined faith, economy, and power in a way that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The Urartians may have worshipped gods with unpronounceable names, but their story is a familiar one, a tale of ambition, sacrifice, and the eternal quest for favor in the eyes of the divine. As we move forward, we'll delve deeper into the intricacies of this ancient kingdom, exploring how the Urartians balanced the demands of their gods with the challenges of empire building in a world where faith and fortune were forever intertwined. As we dive deeper into the labyrinthine world of the Urartian priesthood, let's set aside the incense for a moment and get our hands dirty with some real talk. Forget the fantasy of priests draped in divine light, whispering mystical incantations like a scene from a Hollywood epic. The reality: think less wizard in a tower and more middle manager with a clipboard. First off, the Urartian priesthood wasn't some celestial hotline where you could dial up the guards for a quick chat about the weather or the next harvest. These priests were the ancient equivalent of bureaucrats, and their day-to-day was as glamorous as filing tax returns. Sure, they wore fancy robes and had a direct line to the temples, but their tasks were often more about logistics than liturgy. Consider this. The Urartian priesthood was deeply embedded in the economic and political fabric of the kingdom. They oversaw the distribution of those hefty tributes we talked about earlier, everything from livestock to grain. Picture a priest not as an otherworldly figure, but as a supply chain manager, ensuring the temple coffers were stocked and the guards' demands met without a hitch. And just like modern supply chain issues, when things went wrong, it was their heads on the chopping block. Figuratively, of course, unless things got really dire. Now, let's tackle the myth of divine connection. The idea that Urartian priests had a direct line to the gods was more of a PR move than reality. Their supposed conversations with deities were less about divine insight and more about interpreting the whims of rulers and the needs of the state. The priests acted as intermediaries, yes, but their messages were often crafted to align with the kingdom's political goals. Imagine the celestial equivalent of a press secretary spinning a story to suit the narrative of the day. Moreover, the priests wielded significant power, not because they could wield thunderbolts, but because they controlled the flow of tributes and resources. They were the gatekeepers of divine favor, and that came with serious clout. Want a good harvest? Better make sure you're in the priest's good books. It's like trying to get your boss to approve your holiday leave. A little persuasion goes a long way. But let's not get carried away with the idea of all-powerful priests pulling the strings behind the scenes. They were still at the mercy of the kingdom's rulers, who could depose a priest as easily as they appointed one. The political landscape of Urartu was as treacherous as its mountainous terrain, and the priests had to navigate it with the skill of a tightrope walker. Step out of line, and you might find yourself out of a job, or worse. Behind the scenes, priestly life was also a grind. Daily tasks included maintaining temple grounds, preparing ritual offerings, and overseeing the temple workforce. And if you think your day job is tedious, imagine cataloging sacrifices and ensuring the right entrails were read for the right occasion. It was a life of constant vigilance, with every ceremony needing to go off without a hitch to keep both guards and rulers appeased. Here's a kicker. The priesthood was not a monolithic entity. Different temples had different hierarchies, and competition among priests was fierce. Ambitious priests had to maneuver their way up the ranks, often through politicking and alliances rather than divine intervention. It was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about climbing the temple ladder, one rung at a time. Despite the mundane reality, the allure of the priesthood was undeniable. The idea of communing with gods carried a romantic appeal that drew many into its fold. It was a position of respect and influence, with perks that included access to temple wealth and a say in kingdom affairs. But it was also a life of relentless duty, where the weight of divine expectation hung heavy on their shoulders. In essence, Urartian priests were the unsung heroes, or perhaps unsung operators of their society. They kept the spiritual and economic wheels turning, ensuring the delicate balance of power remained unbroken. So, while the myths of divine connection made for great stories, the truth was a tale of human endeavor, political intrigue, and a whole lot of hard work. As we continue to explore the Urartian world, let's remember that behind every myth is a reality that's just as fascinating, if not more so. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is sure to be as riveting as this one. As the Urartian priesthood navigated its intricate web of divine duties and political maneuvering, the sands of time were quietly working against them. The grand temples and fortresses that once dominated the landscape began to crumble, not just under the weight of centuries, but also due to shifting power dynamics that no amount of incense could stave off. By the late 6th century BCE, the Urartian Empire was facing the ultimate existential crisis: decline. Now, decline is a polite way of saying things were falling apart faster than a poorly assembled IKEA bookshelf. The empire, once so mighty, was beset by invasions and internal strife. External pressures from the rising powers of the Medes, and later the Persians chipped away at Urartu's territorial holdings like an overzealous sculptor attacking a block of marble. Internally, the kingdom's infrastructure, both political and spiritual, was fraying. The centralized control that had once allowed the priests to act as power brokers was dissolving into a patchwork of local rulers and competing interests. Economically, the decline was as predictable as a Monday morning. The rich flow of tributes to the temples dried up, leaving priests scrambling to maintain their lavish rituals and the opulent lifestyles they had grown accustomed to. Without those hefty offerings, the temples, which had functioned as both spiritual centers and economic hubs, lost their financial grip. Imagine your favorite celebrity going bankrupt and having to sell their mansion. It was that kind of fall from grace. But let's not write off the Urartians without acknowledging their lasting impact. Despite the collapse, the Urartian legacy seeped into the DNA of the civilizations that followed. When the Assyrians came knocking, and they did with a battering ram, they didn't just loot and pillage. They absorbed. The Urartian architectural style, with its grandiose temples and fortresses, found new life in Assyrian and later Achaemenid Persian designs. It's as if they left behind a blueprint for how to build an empire that could stand the test of time, at least for a while. And let's talk myth-making, that ever-popular human pastime. The Urartians weren't just builders. They were storytellers, weaving tales of gods and heroes that echoed through the ages. Their pantheon, with its drama and divine intrigue, laid the groundwork for future mythologies. The allure of these stories, rich with moral lessons and cosmic battles, is a thread that runs through human history, from Homeric epics to modern-day superhero sagas. The names may change, but the fascination with larger-than-life characters remains a constant. So, what can we learn from the Urartians? For one, human societies have an enduring knack for myth-making and the belief in something greater than themselves, whether it's a pantheon of gods or the ideal of democracy. The rituals and symbols they left behind remind us that faith, in its many forms, has always been a cornerstone of civilization, a way to make sense of the chaos, to find order in the unpredictable world we inhabit. Moreover, the Urartians highlight the enduring connection between faith and power. Their story is a testament to how religion can be wielded as both a unifier and a tool of control. It's a dynamic that echoes throughout history, from the divine right of kings to modern political rhetoric. The gods may have been left behind, but the strategies remain. In reflecting on the Urartians, we're reminded of the surprising ways ancient practices mirror our modern world. Whether it's the economic implications of religious institutions or the political machinations behind divine decrees, the past has an uncanny way of repeating itself. The Urartians, with their grand dreams and eventual decline, offer a poignant reminder that empires rise and fall, but the human spirit's quest for meaning and legacy endures. As we close this chapter on the Urartians, let's keep in mind that their story is not just a tale of stone and sacrifice, but a window into the timeless human condition. So, next time you find yourself marveling at the ruins of an ancient temple or watching a blockbuster movie about gods and heroes, spare a thought for the Urartians. They were among the first to carve their myths into the annals of history, leaving behind a legacy as solid and enduring as the mountains themselves. And in doing so, they remind us that while civilizations may crumble, the stories we tell and the lessons they impart are forever. In a world where politicking was as much a family affair as a national sport, Empress Kōgyoku, born as Takara no Himiko in 594 AD, was already poised for the drama of the Asuka period before she could even say dynastic succession. Think of her early years as a crash course in real-life Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of intrigue and an impressive roster of historical heavyweights. Her father, Prince Chinu, had a lineage that would make a genealogy enthusiast weep with joy, while her mother, Princess Kibitsuheim, ensured Takara was steeped in the complex web of alliances that defined early Japanese court life. From a young age, Takara was not just a passive observer, but a participant in this elaborate dance of power. The Asuka period was a time of immense cultural transformation, marked by the arrival of Buddhism from Korea and China. Japan was like a sponge, absorbing these influences with an enthusiasm that bordered on the theatrical. The new religion wasn't just about serene contemplation. It was a tool for political maneuvering. Temples sprang up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each a monument to the piety and power of its patron. As a child, Takara would have been steeped in these changes. Picture her attending courtly gatherings, where the air was thick with the scent of incense and the even thicker aroma of ambition. This was not a simple time of cherry blossoms and poetry. It was an era of seismic shifts. The Soga clan, into which Takara's mother had married, was particularly adept at navigating these changes. They were the power brokers of the day, the kind of people who could make or break emperors with a well-timed alliance or a subtle nudge in the right direction. Her first coronation in 642 AD was not just a personal milestone, but a significant moment in Japan's history. The socio-political climate was as turbulent as a typhoon, with rival factions jostling for influence. Takara, now Empress Kōgyoku, was thrust into a world where the stakes were as high as the hairdos were elaborate. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a key player in a grand narrative of power and religion. The Soga clan, particularly Soga no Emishi, her maternal uncle, had played their cards right, ensuring their influence was felt throughout her reign. Emishi was the kind of uncle who could give Machiavelli a run for his money, smoothly pulling strings from behind the scenes. The influence of Buddhism was central to their strategy. If religion was the opiate of the masses, then the Sogas were its most fervent pharmacists, doling out temple constructions and Buddhist rituals like political candy. But let's not kid ourselves. Kōgyoku's rise wasn't all smooth sailing and Zen gardens. The Asuka period was defined by its contradictions. On one hand, it was a time of cultural flowering, with art and architecture flourishing like never before. On the other, it was a period of ruthless power struggles, where allegiances were as changeable as the seasons. Takara, molded by her family's ambitions and the era's cultural dynamics, was a product of her time and a force to be reckoned with. Her first stint as Empress was a balancing act between tradition and innovation, a tightrope walk over a chasm of political uncertainty. The fact that she managed to hold her own in this turbulent time is a testament to her political acumen and the intricate web of alliances that supported her. As we delve deeper into her life, it becomes clear that Empress Kōgyoku was not just a passive participant in the events of her time, but an active architect of her destiny. Her story is one of resilience and adaptability, a narrative woven into the very fabric of Japan's history. As we explore the details of her reign, we'll uncover the layers of complexity that defined her life and the era she helped shape. If Empress Kōgyoku's first reign were a Netflix series, it would definitely come with a binge alert disclaimer. Her time on the throne from 642 to 645 AD was nothing short of a political thriller, with enough intrigue to rival a John le Carré novel. Let's dive in, shall we? First off, let's talk about the Soga clan. Picture them as the ancient Japanese equivalent of a political dynasty like the Kennedys or the Bushes, only with more swords and fewer TV cameras. Soga no Emishi, Kōgyoku's uncle, was the puppet master extraordinaire, the kind of guy who could navigate court politics with the finesse of a chess grandmaster, if chess involved a lot more ceremonial robes and less sitting down. His grip on power was tight, and his family's influence was as pervasive as cherry blossoms in spring. Now, why was the Soga clan so influential, you ask? Simple. They understood that in the Game of Thrones, real thrones, not the HBO kind, control over religion meant control over the people. Buddhism was their tool of choice, and they wielded it with the skill of a master craftsman. By backing Buddhist temples and rituals, they won the hearts and minds of the people, turning piety into political capital. It was a brilliant strategy, really. Who needs an army when you can have monks singing your praises? But all was not well in paradise. The Soga clan's dominance was like a house of cards, and all it took was one gust of ambition to send it tumbling down. Enter Prince Naka no O, the young royal with a penchant for change and a knack for plotting. If Emishi was the seasoned chess player, Naka no O was the wild card who decided it was time to flip the board. The year 645 AD marked the infamous Ishii incident, a coup d'etat that would upend the political landscape of Japan. It was a classic case of out with the old, in with the new, except this wasn't just some youthful rebellion. This was a calculated move to dismantle the Soga's stranglehold over the court. The coup was meticulously planned, much like a heist movie where everything goes according to plan, until it doesn't. The stakes were high, and the tension in the air was palpable. Picture a sweltering summer day in July, the kind where the heat makes everything shimmer like a mirage. In this charged atmosphere, Naka no O and his conspirators made their move. They struck during a court ceremony, a bold choice that spoke volumes about their confidence, or perhaps their desperation. Soga no Uruka, Emeshi's son and the heir apparent to the Soga political legacy, was assassinated in a dramatic display of resolve. The coup was swift, ruthless, and effective. For Kōgyoku, this was a turning point. The coup forced her hand, and she abdicated in favor of her son, Prince Naka no O, who would later ascend the throne as Emperor Tenji. It was a move that spoke to her political savvy. She understood the winds of change were blowing and wisely stepped aside to ensure a smooth transition. But let's not paint her as a mere pawn in this game. Kōgyoku's abdication was as much a strategic retreat as it was a concession. She knew when to hold em and when to fold em, to borrow a phrase from Kenny Rogers. The economic backdrop during this tumultuous period was as complex as the political one. Japan was undergoing significant transformations, with the introduction of new agricultural techniques and the adoption of Chinese-style governance models. The ruling class was increasingly interested in land reforms, which, spoiler alert, would come to fruition under Naka no O's later reign. These reforms aimed to consolidate imperial power and reduce the influence of the great clans, a not-so-subtle jab at the Sogas, one might say. In the midst of all this, Kōgyoku's reign was a study in contrasts. On one hand, she was caught in the crossfire of familial and political rivalries. On the other, she was a catalyst for change, her reign setting the stage for a new era in Japanese history. Her story is not just one of power lost and gained, but of resilience and adaptation. In the grand tapestry of history, Kōgyoku's first reign is a testament to the ever-changing dynamics of power and the individuals who navigate its perilous waters. As we continue to unravel Kōgyoku's legacy, it becomes clear that her influence extended far beyond her abdication. The events of her first reign set in motion a series of changes that would redefine the political landscape of Japan. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over, and our Empress has a second act that's just as compelling. Kōgyoku's abdication was not the curtain call of a fading star, but more like a strategic intermission. Picture this: our Empress, having handed the reins over to her son with the grace of a veteran diplomat, steps out of the spotlight but doesn't exit the stage entirely. Instead, she retreats to a life that, while quieter, was anything but uneventful. Imagine Kōgyoku in retirement. Though, let's be honest, retirement for a former empress was less about shuffleboard and more about strategic counsel and courtly influence. In the years following her abdication, in 645 AD, Kōgyoku embraced the role of a senior stateswoman, a sort of behind-the-scenes powerhouse. Her residence became a hub for the politically astute, a place where whispers of court intrigue blended with the aroma of incense. It was as if she was running a political salon, where the shoji screens kept secrets as well as they let in light. Meanwhile, the political landscape was shifting like sand dunes in a desert storm. Prince Naka no O, who had orchestrated the bold coup, wasn't resting on his laurels. He was busy implementing sweeping reforms that would reshape Japan's governance. These weren't just minor tweaks, they were seismic changes. Land reforms, inspired by Chinese models, sought to centralize power under the imperial court, thus reducing the grip of the clans that had held sway for generations. This was no small feat, considering the entrenched interests at play. Economically, Japan was in the midst of a transformation. The adoption of Chinese agricultural techniques was revolutionizing rice cultivation, increasing yields, and by extension, the empire's coffers. The introduction of wet rice agriculture, in particular, was like hitting the agricultural jackpot. It allowed for double cropping, which meant more rice, more revenue, and crucially, more power concentrated in the hands of the central government. This was the era when the seeds of what would become a highly sophisticated bureaucracy were being sown. Culturally, the Asuka period continued to be a melting pot of influences, with Buddhism leading the charge like a spiritual rock star. Temples were the architectural equivalent of social media influencers, drawing people in droves. This religious fervor wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment, it was about political capital. Temples became power centers, not just sanctuaries, with their own lands and economic clout. If you wanted to make a statement, you didn't just build a temple, you built a temple that would awe the gods themselves. But let's not kid ourselves. These temples weren't just spiritual havens. They were also the ancient Japanese version of a political campaign headquarters. Building a temple was like saying, "Look at me, I'm pious and powerful, all in one go." It was a way to assert influence without uttering a single word, a silent sermon of supremacy. Now, back to Kōgyoku. Though she was no longer holding the scepter, her influence was felt in the whispered counsel she offered to those in power. She was the kind of retired monarch who could still command a room with a raised eyebrow or a well-timed cough. Kōgyoku was not just a relic of the past. She was an active participant in shaping the future. Her wisdom and experience made her a valuable asset, not to mention a formidable player in courtly chess games. Fast forward to 655 AD, and the political winds were shifting again. By this time, Kōgyoku's son, now Emperor Tenji, had firmly established his authority. However, the court was anything but a monolith. Factionalism was as vibrant as ever, with court officials and aristocrats jostling for influence like eager participants in a game of musical chairs. This is where things get juicy. The court needed a stabilizing force, a figure who could command respect across the board. Enter Kōgyoku, stage left. Her return to power as Empress Seimei was not just a nostalgic nod to the past, but a calculated move to ensure continuity and stability. It was like calling in the cavalry, except the cavalry was a seasoned empress who knew the political terrain like the back of her hand. Her second reign was not without challenges. She had to navigate a court that was as treacherous as it was glittering. The political environment was a veritable minefield, with alliances as fragile as cherry blossoms in a storm. But Kōgyoku, now Empress Seimei, was no stranger to the game. She stepped back into the role with the confidence of someone who had seen it all and then some. One of the first hurdles she faced was the simmering tension with neighboring Korea. The Korean peninsula, a patchwork of kingdoms, was a hotspot of geopolitical intrigue. Japan's interests in the region were both economic and strategic, making it a high-stakes poker game where every move counted. Seimei had to be both diplomat and strategist, balancing the demands of domestic politics with the complexities of foreign policy. Her return was not merely a symbolic gesture. It was a testament to her enduring influence and the respect she commanded. Despite the passage of time, she remained a force to be reckoned with, a reminder that in the world of politics, experience and wisdom often trump youthful ambition. As we pause here, it's clear that Empress Seimei's second act was shaping up to be as compelling as her first. Her story, far from over, continues to unfold with all the twists and turns of a historical epic. So stay tuned, because our Empress is back in the game, and the stakes are higher than ever. So, as Empress Seimei settled into her second reign, the political scene wasn't just a game of chess. It was more like three-dimensional chess, with pieces made of ambition, alliances, and a sprinkle of old-school vengeance. The year was 655 AD, and Japan, under Seimei's experienced eye, was gearing up for some serious international intrigue. Picture the Korean peninsula during this time, a land divided into three main kingdoms, Beach, Silla, and Goguryeo, each vying for dominance like siblings fighting over the last slice of cake. And Japan had a vested interest in this familial squabble, specifically with Beach, its long-time ally. Enter the Beach Restoration, a plot thicker than a bowl of miso soup. The kingdom of Beach had fallen to the forces of Silla and Tang China in 660 AD, a loss that sent ripples of panic across the waters to Japan. For Seimei, this wasn't just about camaraderie. It was about maintaining a strategic foothold on the peninsula. Losing Beach was akin to misplacing a key piece in the geopolitical jigsaw puzzle. The restoration of Beach became a priority, and with it, Seimei's reign took on a decidedly martial tone. Let's talk about the military campaign that followed, a bold move that was about as subtle as a katana to the back. Seimei, proving she was no armchair commander, took the field herself. That's right. The Empress, at the ripe age of 67, donned armor and led her forces. This wasn't just a PR stunt, it was a statement. Seimei's presence at the front lines was meant to inspire her troops and remind everyone that Japan was serious about its commitments to Beach. The logistics of this campaign were nothing short of Herculean. Imagine coordinating nearly 30,000 troops across the treacherous waters of the Korea Strait, a body of water that has claimed more than its fair share of ships and souls. The fleet that sailed was an impressive sight. Hundreds of vessels, each packed with soldiers, supplies, and the hopes of a nation. It was a costly endeavor, both in terms of resources and human lives, but Seimei was banking on a swift victory to justify the expense. Now, let's get real for a moment. War is never as glorious as the bards would have you believe, and the beach campaign was no different. The Japanese forces faced fierce resistance, not only from the Silla and Tang armies, but also from the harsh realities of logistics, disease, and the unforgiving elements. The climate of the Korean peninsula was notoriously unpredictable. One minute you're basking in the sun, the next you're shivering in a downpour that makes your armor rust faster than you can say, strategic retreat. The economic impact of this military adventure was significant. Funding a campaign of such magnitude required deep pockets and creative budgeting. The coffers of the Yamato court were stretched thin, and the burden of war was felt across the land. Agriculture, the backbone of Japan's economy, took a hit as resources were diverted to support the war effort. But for Seimei, the stakes were worth the gamble. The restoration of beach was not merely about territory. It was about securing Japan's influence and honor on the international stage. Diplomatically, Seimei was playing a complex game of Go, maneuvering her pieces to counteract the growing influence of Silla and Tang. She dispatched envoys to secure alliances and gather intelligence, a sort of ancient espionage network that kept the court informed and, hopefully, one step ahead. The stakes were high, and the diplomatic channels were as busy as a Tokyo subway at rush hour. However, even the best-laid plans can go awry, and the Battle of Beitgang in 663 AD was a humbling experience. The Japanese forces, despite their valiant efforts and Seimei's personal leadership, suffered a devastating defeat. The combined forces of Silla and Tang China proved too formidable, and the dream of a restored beach slipped through Japan's fingers like sand. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a stark reminder that even the mightiest can falter. This defeat had a ripple effect on Japan's international relations. It was a moment of reckoning, forcing the Yamato court to reassess its strategies and priorities. The loss underscored the need for a more robust naval presence, something that would take years to develop. It also highlighted the importance of alliances and the necessity of adapting to changing geopolitical realities. Yet, amidst the ashes of defeat, there was resilience. Seimei, ever the pragmatic leader, began to lay the groundwork for future endeavors. Her reign, though marked by this military setback, was not defined by it. Instead, it served as a catalyst for change, prompting innovations in military tactics and technology. The defeat at Beitgang, while a blow, was also a lesson, a harsh, costly lesson, but one that would inform Japan's future engagements on the international stage. As we pause here, it's clear that Empress Seimei's story is far from over. Her reign was a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, wisdom, and perseverance. The beach campaign, though ending in defeat, showcased her commitment to her nation and her willingness to take risks for its future. Stay tuned, because Seimei's legacy continues to unfold, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue and revelation. And so, in the aftermath of the beach campaign, we turn our gaze back to Empress Seimei, an empress who, despite the bruising defeat, remained a towering figure in the annals of Japanese history. The year was 661 AD, and Seimei, at the age of 68, was still a force to be reckoned with, her sharp mind undulled by the years or the setbacks. But time, as it does, waits for no one, not even for an empress who had reigned twice. Now, let's talk about Seimei's legacy, because let's face it, her story is too juicy to end with a military blunder. She passed away on August 24, 661 AD, while still on campaign, underscoring her dedication to her cause and her people. Her death marked the end of an era, a period characterized by political intrigue, cultural upheaval, and the ebb and flow of power like the tides of the inland sea. Seimei's legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of resilience and adaptability. She was a pioneer as Japan's only twice crowned empress, a title that sounds like the kind of thing you'd find in a hall of fame for historical heavyweights. Her dual reigns, first as Kōgyoku and then as Seimei, were not just about the glory and ritual of the throne. They were about steering Japan through turbulent waters, both figuratively and literally. But let's not sugarcoat it. Her reigns were fraught with challenges. The political landscape of the Asuka period was a battlefield of its own, with factionalism and court intrigue as rampant as cherry blossoms in spring. Her ability to navigate this treacherous terrain speaks volumes about her political acumen and the depth of her understanding of the court's machinations. Historically, Seimei's reigns have been interpreted through various lenses. Some view her as a pawn in the hands of the male courtiers who surrounded her, a figurehead manipulated by the likes of Prince Naka no O and other power players. But such a view underestimates her agency and the subtlety of her influence. While she may have operated within the constraints of her time, her decisions and actions suggest a shrewd leader capable of wielding power in her own right. The romantic myths surrounding her reigns paint a picture of an empress who was both a warrior and a mother figure, a dichotomy that appeals to our love for legendary figures who defy simple categorization. Yet, the reality was far more complex. As a ruler, she had to balance the expectations of her court, the demands of her role, and the shifting sands of international politics. It was a high-wire act that required not only skill, but also an innate understanding of human nature and the art of diplomacy. Economically, her reigns were set against the backdrop of a Japan that was undergoing significant transformation. The adoption of Chinese agricultural techniques had set the stage for increased productivity and economic growth. This was a time when the seeds of a centralized state were being sown, with reforms aimed at reducing the power of the great clans and consolidating imperial authority. Seimei's reigns were pivotal in this transition, providing the continuity and stability needed for these changes to take root. Seimei's influence extended beyond her lifetimes. Her reigns set precedents for future empresses and established a model of leadership that balanced tradition with innovation. The cultural shifts of the Asuka period, from the embrace of Buddhism to the evolution of courtly rituals, were both a canvas and a legacy, reflecting the broader transformations of early Japan. As we reflect on Seimei's story, it becomes clear that her legacy is one of resilience in the face of adversity and adaptability in the midst of change. Hers was a life marked by significant milestones and challenges, an embodiment of the complexities and contradictions that define history itself. She leaves behind a narrative rich with lessons for both her contemporaries and us modern-day observers. So, as we wrap up our journey through the life of Empress Kōgyoku/Seimei, it's worth remembering that history is not merely a collection of dates and events. It's the story of people like Seimei, who despite the odds, managed to make their mark on the world. Her legacy is a testament to the power of leadership, the resilience of the human spirit, and the enduring impact of those who dare to lead in uncertain times. And while the myths may embellish her story, it's the reality of her reigns that continues to resonate, reminding us that history, like life, is rarely black and white, but rather a tapestry of vibrant colors and intricate patterns. High in the Andes, where the air is as thin as a runway model and the landscape unfolds like a green velvet blanket, the Muisca Confederation once thrived. This wasn't some mythical land conjured up by fevered explorers' imaginations, but a real place with real people who had a knack for organization that would make even the most ardent corporate ladder climber blush. The Muisca inhabited the high-altitude savannas of present-day Colombia, a region that sits pretty at around 500 meters. That's over 200 feet for those who still think in imperial units, above sea level. It was here that they built their society, one structured with all the efficiency of a medieval board meeting, minus the PowerPoint and awkward team-building exercises. Now, the Muisca Confederation wasn't just a single entity with a monolithic ruler like some Game of Thrones knockoff. Instead, it was a collection of chiefdoms with a political landscape as intricate as a soap opera plot. At the top, you had two main players, the Zipa ruling over Bakatar, what we now call Bogota, and the Zak holding court in Hunza, now Tunya. Imagine them as the CEOs of their respective territories, each managing their own fiefdoms with a keen eye on trade, alliances, and occasionally a bit of friendly rivalry. Their confederation was more about cooperation than conquest, a system of alliances and mutual benefit that kept the peace more often than not. Think of it like a medieval linked-in network, where the chiefdoms stayed connected without the need for constant warfare. While the Zipa and Zak were the big names on the marquee, they were supported by a council of caciques, or local chiefs, who managed the day-to-day affairs. Each had their own domain and responsibilities, making sure the Confederation's gears kept turning smoothly. Let's talk geography for a moment, because where you live shapes who you become, right? The Muisca's territory spanned across the Altiplano Cundiboyacense, a high plateau that would make any altitude-sick tourist swoon. The area was blessed with fertile lands and abundant resources, which, let's be honest, is code for other people will definitely want to invade. Despite the looming threat of invasions, Muisca held their ground, thanks largely to their knack for agriculture and trade. They cultivated everything from maize to potatoes, proving that carbs are indeed the foundation of any successful civilization. Now, before we spiral into tales of golden cities and treasure maps, let's tackle the glittering elephant in the room, El Dorado. Ah yes, the legend that launched 1,000 ill-fated expeditions. Spoiler alert. The Muisca didn't have streets paved with gold. They did, however, have a ritual involving the Zipa being covered in gold dust, and then diving into Lake Guaravita, which sounds like a scene straight out of an ancient James Bond movie. This ceremony wasn't a daily occurrence, but rather a symbolic gesture of renewal and power. Gold, for the Muisca, wasn't just a shiny metal to be hoarded. It had spiritual significance, a fact that eluded many greedy conquistadors who were too busy fantasizing about giant piles of bling. The myth of El Dorado, while rooted in reality, was exaggerated to the point that it turned into the 16th century equivalent of a viral meme. It was a story that captured the imagination of Europeans who were all too eager to believe in a land where wealth could be plucked from the ground like daisies. But back in the highlands, the Muisca were more concerned with their actual economy, which thrived on trade rather than myth. They exchanged emeralds, salt, and textiles, weaving a network that stretched across the continent long before the term globalization was coined. So, why does any of this matter? Well, understanding the Muisca Confederation gives us a clearer picture of pre-Columbian civilizations, reminding us that these societies were far from the primitive caricatures often painted by colonizers. They were complex, strategic, and capable of feats that would make today's urban planners take notes. Their confederation wasn't just a political structure. It was a testament to human ingenuity in the face of challenges, both environmental and existential. In the end, the Muisca's story isn't just about gold or rituals. It's about resilience and adaptability. It's a reminder that history is rarely as simple as it seems, and that the most captivating stories often lie beneath the surface, waiting for someone to dive in and uncover them. As we continue to explore the depths of their culture and achievements, it becomes clear that the Muisca were more than just a footnote in the saga of El Dorado. They were a vibrant, dynamic society whose legacy continues to intrigue and inspire. The Muisca's story, with its glittering legends and grit-grounded reality, doesn't stop at mythology. Let's dive into their economic acumen, which was as sharp as an obsidian blade. This was no primitive barter economy, but a sophisticated system built on 3 pillars: salt, emeralds, and agriculture. Imagine salt, the kind you now sprinkle on your fries, being as precious as gold. For the Muisca, it was the white gold of the Andes, mined from briny springs and transformed into slabs that fueled trade routes stretching far beyond their mountainous home. Emeralds, those green gems that make jewelry stores twinkle, were another cornerstone of the Muisca economy. They weren't just pretty stones to them. They were treasures of the earth, mined with a delicate balance of reverence and pragmatism. The Muisca didn't just hoard these gems. They traded them, creating a network that reached tribes and territories across South America. Think of it as pre-Columbian stock trading, where emeralds were the blue-chip assets everyone wanted. Now, salt and emeralds might sound glamorous, but let's not forget agriculture, the unsung hero of their economy. Picture terraces carved into the mountains like nature's stairmaster, where maize, potatoes, and quinoa thrived. The Muisca's agricultural prowess wasn't just about planting crops. It was about engineering landscapes. They turned the daunting Andes into fertile fields, a feat of environmental manipulation that would make any modern-day farmer tip their hat in respect. And here's where we get to the heart of their economy, the barter system. Forget about drones and next-day delivery. The Muisca had something better. Their markets were the original Amazon Prime, where goods flowed with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Markets like Bakatar and Hunza were bustling hubs, operating on the simple yet effective principle of mutual need. You've got salt. I've got potatoes. Let's make a deal. It was a system that relied on trust and necessity, where goods were exchanged with a handshake and a nod, not a credit card swipe. But let's not romanticize it too much. The logistics of these markets were complex enough to give any modern-day supply chain manager a headache. Transporting goods across the rugged Andean terrain was no small feat. Imagine hauling heavy slabs of salt over mountains without the luxury of wheels or beasts of burden. It was a labor-intensive process, requiring a network of porters who traversed the landscape like human ants, each with a specific role in the web of trade. The costs were high, both in terms of human effort and resources, but the payoff was an economy that thrived on exchange rather than exploitation. Now, about those famed Muisca markets, picture a scene straight out of an ancient marketplace painting. Vendors hawking their wares, the air thick with the scent of fresh produce and the buzz of transactions. But beneath the vibrant facade, there was a harsh reality. Maintaining these markets demanded significant resources. It wasn't just about setting up stalls. It was about organizing the flow of goods, ensuring there was enough supply to meet demand, and managing the inevitable disputes that arose when someone's maize didn't quite measure up. The romantic image of the Muisca's wealth, often painted with broad strokes of gold and emerald, glosses over the economic intricacies that made it all possible. Their wealth wasn't just lying around in piles. It was circulating through a complex web of trade relationships, each link as vital as the next. The Muisca's economic success wasn't about amassing wealth for its own sake. It was about creating a sustainable system where everyone had a stake. Their markets were a testament to their ability to turn resources into prosperity, long before the industrial age turned commerce into a global affair. In dissecting the Muisca's economic prowess, we see a society that was as strategic as it was spiritual, as practical as it was visionary. The story isn't just about the glitter of gold or the gleam of emeralds. It's about the nuts and bolts of an economy that ran like a finely tuned machine. As we unravel the layers of Muisca culture, it becomes clear that their legacy is more than just a footnote in history. It's a blueprint for understanding how trade, trust, and tenacity can shape a civilization, and maybe even inspire a few modern-day entrepreneurs along the way. With the Muisca's economy ticking like a Swiss watch, let's pivot to their cultural flair, which was just as meticulously crafted. If you think your color-coded planner is impressive, wait until you hear about the Muisca calendar. These folks had a timekeeping system that would make even the most disciplined project manager weep with envy. The Muisca calendar wasn't just about marking the passage of time. It was a cosmic symphony of astronomy and agriculture, aligning celestial events with earthly affairs. They used a lunisolar calendar, which is a fancy way of saying they kept track of both the moon and the sun, using them to dictate everything from planting seasons to religious ceremonies. Forget about daylight savings time. These guys were on a whole other level. Their calendar was divided into two main cycles, the solar year of 365 days and a lunar year of 29. 5 days per month, with an extra month thrown in every few years to keep things synchronized. It sounds complicated, right? But for the Muisca, it was as natural as breathing. They didn't just track time, they lived it, letting the heavens guide their earthly endeavors with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker's head spin. This celestial choreography was more than a scheduling tool. It was a testament to their understanding of the natural world and their place within it. Speaking of cosmic events, let's talk festivals. Imagine a celebration that's part Burning Man, part accounting meeting, where revelers and record-keepers mingle under the stars. The Muisca had a knack for throwing festivals that were equal parts spiritual retreat and logistical challenge. These weren't just excuses to party. They were sacred gatherings that reinforced social bonds and religious observance. One of the standout events was the Festival of the Sun, a dazzling spectacle that honored sun god. Picture it: rituals, music, dancing, and enough chicha to fill a small lake. Chicha, the corn-based drink that was the social lubricant of Muisca society, played a starring role in these festivities. It was the ancient equivalent of a craft beer, brewed with care and consumed with gusto. But don't be fooled by its humble ingredients. Chicha was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of hospitality, a means of sealing deals, And let's not mince words, a way to get everyone just tipsy enough to forget about daily woes. In social gatherings, chicha flowed as freely as gossip at a royal court, greasing the wheels of conversation and camaraderie. And while we're on the topic of divine interventions, let's address the Muisca's relationship with their gods, who, much like a lazy weatherman, always seem to get all the credit and none of the blame for whatever Mother Nature dished out. If the crops flourished, it was thanks to the benevolent deities. If a storm flattened a year's worth of maize, well, it was probably a reminder that humans shouldn't get too cocky about their agricultural prowess. Their pantheon was a celestial soap opera, with gods overseeing every aspect of life and nature, from the fertility of the land to the cycles of the moon. But here's the kicker. While the gods were often thanked or blamed for the weather, the Muisca knew a thing or two about microclimates and meteorology. They didn't just pray for rain, they observed patterns, predicted changes, and adapted accordingly. Their understanding of weather wasn't just mystical, it was practical. They knew when to sow and when to harvest, using their calendar as a guide and their gods as a narrative device to frame the chaos of the natural world. So, why does any of this matter? Because the Muisca's cultural and religious practices were more than just quaint rituals. They were the backbone of a society that understood the value of order in the midst of chaos. Their festivals weren't just parties. They were strategic gatherings that reinforced social cohesion and religious devotion. Their calendar wasn't just a way to tell time. It was an instrument of survival, aligning human endeavors with cosmic rhythms. And their gods, while often portrayed as whimsical overseers, were part of a broader narrative that connected the Muisca to the land and the stars. In unraveling these cultural threads, we see a society that was as much about myth as it was about reality. The Muisca didn't just exist, they thrived, weaving a tapestry of life that was both pragmatic and poetic. Their story isn't just about what they believed, it's about how they lived, turning the ordinary into the extraordinary, and the mundane into the meaningful. As we continue to explore the depths of their culture, it's clear that the Muisca were more than just a footnote in history. They were a vibrant testament to the power of human ingenuity and imagination. And with that, we leave the Muisca's cultural landscape open for further exploration, ready to uncover more about their intriguing and multifaceted legacy. Turning our gaze from the cultural tapestry of the Muisca, let's venture into the political labyrinth that was their confederation, a place where alliances were as stable as a soap bubble. The Muisca's political dynamics were less about iron-fisted rule and more about a delicate ballet of diplomacy, with each chiefdom pirouetting around potential conflict like a dancer on a tightrope. At the heart of this intricate dance were the Zipa and Zak, those regional powerhouses we've met before. Now, imagine them not as solitary rulers, but as maestros conducting a symphony of caciques, each with their own solo to perform. The real trick, however, was keeping the orchestra from turning into a cacophony. The Muisca's brand of governance was about balancing power, not hoarding it. Think of it as a pre-Columbian version of the real politicians of the Andes, where drama was always one misstep away. Although the Muisca lacked a standing army in the traditional sense, no battalions of armored knights, thank you very much, they were no strangers to warfare. Their strategy was more guerrilla tactician than grand general, relying on swift raids and ambushes that turned the rugged Andean landscape into their greatest ally. Their warriors, donned in tartan armor and armed with clubs and spears, were as much about psychological warfare as they were about physical prowess. Picture warriors appearing and disappearing into the mist like vengeful spirits, a tactic that must have terrified the uninitiated. Now, you might be wondering how they dealt with internal squabbles, considering their chiefdoms were as tightly knit as a dysfunctional family reunion. The key here was diplomacy, with a side of strategic marriage, because nothing says, let's be friends, like a politically motivated wedding. Alliances were forged over chicha and sealed with vows, creating a web of interconnected families that, while occasionally fraught with tension, managed to keep outright conflict at bay. It was a system that relied on mutual benefits and shared interests, where the threat of external foes often served as a unifying force. Speaking of enemies, let's not forget the elephants in the room, those pesky Europeans who arrived with shiny armor and even shinier promises. When the Spanish conquistadors finally set their sights on the Muisca, they found a confederation that was more than the sum of its parts. The Muisca, with their decentralized power structure, were initially challenging to conquer. Conquistadors were used to toppling kingdoms by capturing a single ruler. Here, they found themselves playing a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, as subjugating one chiefdom did little to collapse the rest. The Muisca's defense mechanisms were as much about strategy as they were about savvy diplomacy. They knew when to fight and when to parley, employing a mix of resistance and negotiation to keep their lands from falling too quickly. Fighting the Spanish wasn't about winning battles in the traditional sense. It was about surviving long enough to outlast their invaders' patience. Tragically, we know how this story ends. Disease and betrayal ultimately did what swords could not, unraveling the Muisca's intricate political fabric. But let's not romanticize their resistance too much. While they were undeniably resourceful, internal rivalries sometimes played right into the hands of their conquerors. The Spanish, ever the opportunists, exploited these divisions, promising power to one chiefdom over another, turning former allies into adversaries. It was a classic tale of divide and conquer, a strategy as old as ambition itself. The Muisca's political saga is a reminder that even the most complex systems can be undone by a single, unforeseen variable. It's a story of resilience and adaptation, of a society that thrived in the face of adversity until the odds became insurmountable. Their legacy isn't just one of gold dust and emeralds. It's a testament to the power of collaboration in a world that often values conquest over cooperation. As we prepare to delve deeper into the remaining chapters of the Muisca story, we leave behind a confederation caught between worlds, its achievements a testament to human ingenuity, its downfall a cautionary tale of hubris and vulnerability. The Muisca's political dynamics, with their careful balance of power and diplomacy, offer both a mirror to our past and a lens through which to view our future, reminding us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition and folly. As the dust of conquest settled like a dreary morning fog over the vibrant lands of the Muisca, the impact of the Spanish incursion began to unfold. Imagine it as a cultural blender set to high, with the Muisca's rich heritage being tossed alongside Spanish colonial ambitions, a recipe for a not-so-smooth transition, if ever there was one. The once intricate tapestry of the Muisca Confederation, with its delicate balance of diplomacy and trade, was frayed by the relentless demands of an empire that viewed new territories as little more than a line item on a ledger. The Spanish were not just conquerors, but economic opportunists, keen on squeezing every ounce of value from their new possessions. Forget the romanticized tales of noble conquistadors. These were men with the economic acumen of Wall Street brokers and the ethical backbone of a pirate's parrot. They quickly realized that while the Muisca might not have had cities paved with gold, they had other resources ripe for exploitation. Salt mines, emerald deposits, and fertile lands became the new currency of colonial power, and the Muisca were drafted into the labor force, their skills repurposed for the benefit of their colonial overlords. The encomienda system was thrust upon the Muisca, a charming little arrangement where Spanish settlers were granted land and the labor of the indigenous people residing on it. In practice, it was less about stewardship and more about economic extraction, with the Muisca working tirelessly while the profits flowed into Spanish coffers. It was a system designed to strip resources as efficiently as a vacuum cleaner in an antique shop, leaving the Muisca not only economically impoverished, but culturally dislocated. Now, about that cultural assimilation. If by assimilation you mean the systematic erosion of indigenous practices, then sure, the Muisca were assimilated. Their religious rituals, once vibrant expressions of their connection to the cosmos, were replaced by the rigid doctrines of Catholicism. The Spanish, with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, set about converting the Muisca to the one true faith, often with fire and brimstone as their sales pitch. The Muisca gods, once central to their cosmology, were relegated to myth, their temples dismantled, and their festivals sanitized or outright banned. Yet in a twist of historical irony, the Muisca culture proved more resilient than the Spanish anticipated. Language, customs, and even religious practices found ways to survive, hidden beneath the veneer of colonial rule. The Muisca people, adapting with the same ingenuity that had sustained them for centuries, wove elements of their identity into the very fabric of the imposed culture. It was a form of cultural guerrilla warfare, subtle, persistent, and remarkably effective. Fast forward to modern Colombia, and the Muisca legacy is like a digital footprint that refuses to be erased. Their influence can be seen in place names, traditional practices, and even in the resilience of communities who trace their lineage back to these highland confederates. The Muisca language, though not as widely spoken, has left its mark on the vocabulary of the region, with words like chicha still flowing as freely in conversation as it does in cups. But let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the golden elephant. The legend of El Dorado, while an exaggeration, has bequeathed a lasting allure to Colombia, shaping its global narrative in ways both beneficial and burdensome. Tourists still flock to Lake Guatavita, driven by stories of a gilded Zipa and promises of hidden treasures. This myth, despite its roots in colonial greed, has become a part of the cultural tapestry, a testament to the enduring power of storytelling in shaping history. On the economic front, the legacy of the Muisca is equally tangible. Those emeralds that once glistened in the hands of Muisca traders are now a cornerstone of Colombia's economy, a glittering reminder of the past's enduring influence on the present. Salt, too, retains its significance, albeit more as a culinary staple than a trade linchpin. And agriculture. Well, let's just say the Muisca's expertise in turning rugged terrain into fertile fields has not been forgotten, with modern Colombian farmers still reaping the benefits of ancient practices. In reflecting on the Muisca's place in world history, we find a story that is as much about survival as it is about conquest. Their achievements, from economic networks that spanned continents to cultural practices that bridged worlds, offer a blueprint for resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. They weren't just passive victims of history's tide, but active participants in its course, adapting and enduring in ways that continue to resonate. As we wrap up this historical journey, it's worth remembering that the Muisca were more than just players in a colonial drama. They were architects of their own destiny, whose story is a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of culture. While history might try to bury them beneath layers of conquest and myth, the Muisca's legacy persists, a silent yet potent reminder that the past is never truly past. It lingers, much like that forgotten password you just can't seem to shake. And with that, we tip our hats to the Muisca, whose story is not just a chapter in world history, but a full-fledged saga of survival and spirit. In a world where your dad's profession could range from farmer to blacksmith, Zheng Chenggong hit the jackpot with a pirate. Born in 1624, Zheng Chenggong, or Kōgyoku, as he's often known, made his dramatic entrance on the Japanese island of Dorado. If you're thinking that sounds like the setup for a historical action movie, you're not entirely wrong. The Ming Dynasty was on the rocks, and the world was about as stable as a Jenga tower in a windstorm. Chaos was the currency of the day, and our man Zheng came into the world with a pocket full of it. Zheng wasn't just any kid. He was born to a Chinese pirate father, Zheng Zhilong, and a Japanese mother, Tagawa Matsu. That's like having a dad who's part Robin Hood, part Jack Sparrow, and a mom with enough samurai spirit to make you think twice about skipping your chores. This mix of Chinese and Japanese heritage gave Zheng a unique perspective, which would come in handy when the time came to choose sides in the epic drama of the Ming Dynasty's decline. Before Zheng could even say Ming Dynasty, his father was out there swashbuckling around the coast of China. Zheng Zhilong wasn't just your run-of-the-mill pirate. He was the pirate kingpin, the kind who could make Johnny Depp look like an amateur. By the time Zheng was old enough to understand his dad's job description, Zhilong had built an empire on the high seas with a fleet of ships that would put the Royal Navy to shame. Now, let's talk education. Zheng was groomed with the finest Confucian values, because, you know, every pirate's kid needs a solid moral foundation. He was sent to China for schooling, where he dove into the classics like a kid with a new video game. By the time he was a teenager, he could recite Confucius's teachings backward while juggling 3 flaming swords. Okay, maybe not the swords, but you get the idea. Life wasn't all scrolls and ink, though. Zheng lived against the backdrop of the Ming Dynasty, a once mighty empire now floundering like a fish out of water. Picture this. The Ming Dynasty, having reigned since 1368, was in its death throes by the time young Zheng was hitting puberty. Corruption, rebellion, and Manchu invaders were tearing it apart like a pack of wolves on a chicken dinner. The dynasty's decline was as dramatic as a soap opera, complete with backstabbing, betrayal, and a whole lot of incompetence. Amid this chaos, Zheng had to decide where his loyalties lay. Would he follow in his father's footsteps and continue the family business of piracy, or would he take up the fight for a dying dynasty? It's like being asked to choose between joining a rock band or becoming a classical musician. The allure of the pirate life was strong: adventure, treasure, the open sea. But fighting for the Ming had its own appeal. It was a chance to be a hero, to restore glory, and maybe, just maybe, to keep the world from descending into even more chaos. Zheng made his choice, and it was a doozy. He decided to fight for the Ming Dynasty, a choice that would shape his life and legacy. His decision was like betting on a horse with a limp in the Kentucky Derby, but Zheng wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. With his education, charisma, and a fleet of ships courtesy of dear old Dad, he was ready to make his mark. Zheng Chenggong, then, was no ordinary pirate's son. He was a product of two cultures, educated in the classics and thrust into a world where the stakes were life, death, and the future of an empire. As he stood on the brink of his destiny, one thing was clear. This was a guy who wasn't going to fade into the history books quietly. Stay tuned. There's a lot more to this story, and trust me, it only gets wilder from here. As Zheng Chenggong stood on the precipice of his destiny, he probably didn't foresee just how much stress came with running a pirate fleet that decided to play hero. But hey, he was about to find out. This was no small-time treasure hunt. It was a full-blown naval campaign, with the Qing Dynasty as the target. Talk about aiming high. The Qing were the new kids on the block, having toppled the Ming in 1644, and they didn't take kindly to resistance, especially not from some pirate upstart with a penchant for Ming nostalgia. Zheng's rise to naval commander wasn't a stroll in the park. It was more like a marathon through a minefield, with the occasional cannonball overhead for good measure. His guerrilla warfare tactics were the stuff of legends, or at least they would be if the legends didn't skip over the logistical nightmares. Imagine trying to coordinate hundreds of ships and thousands of sailors who were more used to plundering than politicking. It's like herding cats, if the cats were armed and had a penchant for rum. One of Zheng's first major engagements was the siege of Nanjing in 1659. This wasn't just any old city. Nanjing was a former Ming capital, and retaking it would be a symbolic middle finger to the king. Zheng's forces, numbering around 100,000 men and a fleet of 200 ships, descended upon the city like a swarm of locusts, albeit locusts with swords and cannons. The siege itself was a masterclass in audacity. Zheng's forces stormed in, and for a moment it looked like the city might just fall. But the king weren't about to roll over. They held their ground, fighting tooth and nail, and in the end, Zheng had to retreat, leaving behind a city still firmly in king hands and a lesson in the perils of overreaching. Despite this setback, Zheng's naval prowess can't be discounted. He was like a chess player who didn't just think a few moves ahead, he thought in entire games. His understanding of guerrilla tactics was unparalleled, using the element of surprise to his advantage. But let's not get too misty-eyed about his skills. The romantic image of a pirate-turned-hero commanding the waves often glosses over the less glamorous realities. Like, say, the fact that maintaining a fleet in the 17th century was akin to keeping a fleet of Ferraris fueled and polished in the middle of a desert. Logistics, my friends, were a nightmare. Keeping his fleet supplied was an exercise in creative problem-solving. Food, weapons, and repairs were constant concerns, and the costs were astronomical. Ships required constant upkeep, and you couldn't exactly pop down to the nearest hardware store for parts when a mast broke. Zheng's fleet was a floating city at sea, with all the bureaucratic headaches you'd expect from running a metropolis on waves. Then there's the small matter of managing a crew of privateers. These weren't your typical Navy sailors. They were the kind of men who'd sign up for adventure and plunder, not discipline and chain of command. Zheng had to balance the carrot and the stick, offering enough loot and glory to keep his men loyal, while also ensuring they didn't decide to stage a coup or defect to the highest bidder. It was a delicate dance, and one misstep could mean mutiny. But let's talk about the myths for a second. The legend of Zheng as a naval genius often paints him as a swashbuckling savior with an unerring instinct for victory. The reality is a bit more nuanced. Sure, he had successes, but they were hard-earned and fraught with setbacks. And while his strategic brilliance was undeniable, it was also rooted in necessity. The Ming loyalists didn't have the luxury of standing armies and fortresses. They had to be quick, mobile, and unpredictable, like a rogue wave in a stormy sea. So, what's the takeaway here? Zheng Chenggong was more than just a footnote in history. He was a force of nature, driven by a mix of ambition, loyalty, and the sheer will to carve out a legacy from the chaos. His story, told in the battle-scarred decks of his fleet and the smoke-filled skies of besieged cities, is one of resilience and ingenuity against overwhelming odds. But remember, behind every legendary figure is a messy, complicated reality. And for Zheng, that reality was as turbulent as the seas he commanded. Zheng Chenggong, the man who seemed to think, why go small when you can go epic, wasn't about to let a little thing like a failed siege get him down. With the ink barely dry on his Nanjing withdrawal, he set his sights on an even grander prize, Taiwan. In 1661, Zheng launched his audacious campaign to capture the island from the Dutch, who had been making themselves quite comfortable there. The Dutch were enjoying Taiwan's strategic location, a perfect pit stop for trading ships, and they weren't thrilled about the idea of a Ming loyalist crashing their party. But Zheng was nothing if not persistent. He assembled a fleet of over 400 ships and a sprawling army of 25,000 men. The logistics would make any modern supply chain manager break out in hives. Imagine coordinating that many people and resources across the unpredictable Taiwan Strait. Yet, this was no ordinary mission. It was a calculated move with deep political and economic motivations. For Zheng, Taiwan wasn't just an island. It was a lifeline. It offered a base of operations, a fertile ground for agriculture, and a strategic position from which to launch further attacks against the Qing dynasty. If you're thinking that sounds more like a chess move than a pirate raid, you're catching on. The siege began in April 1661, and let's just say the Dutch didn't exactly roll out the red carpet. They had around 200 men stationed in Fort Zeelandia, their stronghold on the island. But Zheng and his forces weren't there for a leisurely beach vacation. They set up camp and began the slow, gritty process of siege warfare. It was less swashbuckling and more shoveling trenches, building siege towers, and enduring the tropical climate. The Dutch, for their part, were stubborn. They held their ground, hoping for reinforcements that never came. By early 1662, after months of fighting, the Dutch finally waved the white flag. Zheng's forces had successfully captured Taiwan, marking a monumental victory. This wasn't just a military triumph. It was a political statement. Zheng had carved out a haven for Ming loyalists, a place where they could regroup and plan their next moves against the king. It was a bold declaration that the Ming cause was far from dead. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the cultural exchanges that ensued. When two vastly different cultures collide, you get a cocktail of confusion, curiosity, and sometimes comedy. Zheng's forces, mostly Chinese, mingled with the local Taiwanese and the remnants of the Dutch settlers. The Dutch might have been packing up their tulips, but they left behind a legacy of cultural quirks. Picture this: Chinese soldiers trying on wooden clogs or sampling Gouda cheese for the first time. It was like a 17th century version of a reality TV show, only with more swords and fewer commercial breaks. Of course, the mythologization of this event kicked into high gear. Zheng became a larger-than-life figure, a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. In the collective imagination, he was less of a military strategist and more of a folklore hero, a Chinese Robin Hood reclaiming a lost homeland. And while there's a kernel of truth in the romanticized tales, it's important to remember the gritty reality behind the legend. Zheng's victory was hard-won, built on the backs of thousands of soldiers who endured unimaginable hardships. The capture of Taiwan had a lasting impact on Chinese national identity. It was a rallying point for Ming loyalists, a beacon of hope in a time of despair. The idea of reclaiming lost glory resonated deeply, and Zheng became a symbol of resilience and defiance. But let's not get too swept up in the romance. The reality was that Zheng's rule over Taiwan wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Managing an island nation came with its own set of challenges, from economic self-sufficiency to dealing with local resistance. Speaking of absurdities, let's address the grand speeches that often accompany such conquests. History is littered with leaders making flowery declarations while standing on newly claimed land, as if words alone could cement ownership. Zheng was no exception. He made proclamations about restoring the Ming and liberating the people, which sounds noble until you remember that the logistics of governing an island are a bit more complex than just shouting, "I claim this land." It's like thinking you can run a country with a motivational poster and a catchy slogan. So, as we wrap up this chapter, let's acknowledge Zheng's achievements while keeping a healthy dose of skepticism. He was a man of immense talent and vision, but he was also a product of his time. A time when the line between pirate and patriot was as thin as a razor's edge. His capture of Taiwan was a pivotal moment in history, rich with political intrigue, cultural exchanges, and the occasional absurdity. As we look ahead to the next part of Zheng's saga, remember that history is as much about the myths we create as the realities we endure. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and the high seas are calling. And so, with the Dutch retreating and the ink on the peace treaty barely dry, Chenggong found himself with a shiny new island to run. But if you thought commandeering Taiwan was tough, just wait till you hear about his attempts to govern it. Imagine trying to fit a Ming-style court into an island that was a melting pot of cultures, languages, and let's face it, a whole lot of folks not particularly interested in Confucian bureaucracy. First off, let's talk about Zheng's grand vision. He wanted to recreate a little slice of the Ming Dynasty right there in Taiwan. It was like trying to recreate a Renaissance fair in the middle of Times Square. Ambitious, bold, and maybe a touch delusional. He set up his court with all the trimmings, officials, scholars, and even a sprinkle of Confucian rituals for good measure. But here's the kicker. Most of Taiwan's population at the time consisted of indigenous peoples, Han Chinese settlers, and the occasional leftover Dutchman wondering why they hadn't booked an earlier boat home. Zheng's efforts to install Confucian ethics were akin to teaching a cat to fetch. The local population wasn't exactly queuing up to embrace these foreign customs. I mean, how do you sell the allure of ancestor worship to folks who already had perfectly good gods of their own? It was like trying to convince a die-hard Star Wars fan to switch allegiance to Star Trek. Sure, both are space operas, but let's not pretend they're interchangeable. And then there were the economic policies. Zheng aimed to make Taiwan self-sufficient, transforming it into a breadbasket for his forces. But farming isn't something you can just decree into being. It requires cooperation, time, and fertile land, not to mention a population willing to swap their hunting bows for plows. Zheng's agricultural reforms were ambitious, but they met with more resistance than a teenager asked to clean their room. Despite the fertile land, organizing the labor needed to maximize production was like trying to herd jellyfish with a butterfly net. Now, let's pause for a moment to appreciate the comedic gold of attempting to instill Confucian moral order in a society that was about as familiar with it as a fish with a bicycle. Zheng's proclamations about filial piety and respect for elders must have sounded downright bizarre to the island's indigenous tribes, and enforcing these rules, well, that was a whole other level of absurdity. Imagine a Confucian scholar earnestly explaining the importance of ritual propriety to a group of people more accustomed to navigating the dense forests than the intricacies of courtly etiquette. It was less a meeting of minds and more a cultural face-off. But let's not get swept away in the comedy of errors. Zheng's intentions were serious. He was trying to cement his legacy, to carve out a new Ming dynasty in the face of overwhelming odds. The problem was that the reality of governing a diverse island wasn't as straightforward as the romantic tales of wise emperors and benevolent rulers. Zheng's policies, while well-intentioned, often came across as heavy-handed, especially to those who had no interest in being governed by Ming loyalists. Take, for example, his tax policies. Zheng needed funds to support his military endeavors, and that meant squeezing every possible revenue stream. This wasn't the kind of taxation with representation situation. It was more like taxation with a heavy dose of, because I said so. The local population found themselves footing the bill for Zheng's grandiose plans, and let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled about it. And speaking of expenses, the cost of maintaining a court worthy of the Ming name was astronomical. We're talking about gold and silver that could sink a ship, and it didn't just grow on the trees. The court's expenses were a constant drain on resources, leading to a cycle of taxation and resentment. The romance of re-establishing a Ming kingdom in exile was tarnished by the harsh reality of economic strain. But let's not be too hasty in painting Zheng as a villain. Sure, he was a man of his time, and his policies reflected the era's complexities. Yet, the romanticized image of him as a benevolent ruler glosses over the fact that his rule was, at times, more iron fist than open hand. Those who resisted his rule were punished, and those who didn't fit into his vision of a Confucian society often found themselves on the receiving end of harsh justice. So where does that leave us? Zheng Chenggong's governance of Taiwan was a mix of aspiration and impracticality, ambition and absurdity. It was a chapter of history as rich in lessons as it was in legends. He was a man trying to forge a kingdom from chaos, to turn the tide of history with the force of his will. And while he made indelible marks, the romantic tales of his benevolence often forget the very real struggles and opposition he faced. Zheng's story is a fascinating blend of myth and reality, a testament to the complexities of leadership in turbulent times. As we look ahead to the next chapter of his saga, one thing is clear. Governing Taiwan was no easy feat. The high seas may have been unpredictable, but they had nothing on the challenges of ruling an island nation. Stay tuned, because the story of Zheng Chenggong is far from over, and the waves of history are still crashing. As Zheng Chenggong navigated the choppy waters of governance, fate had its own plans, and it wasn't the kind to send a polite RSVP. In June 1662, Zheng, at the age of 37, succumbed to illness. Whether it was the tropical climate, the stress of leadership, or simply the hand of destiny, his sudden death sent shockwaves through his fledgling kingdom. The man who had carved his name into the annals of history as a pirate-turned-patriot was suddenly gone, and his grand vision for Taiwan was left adrift like a ship without a rudder. With Zheng's departure, the power vacuum was as palpable as the humidity hanging over Taiwan. His son, Zheng Jing, was thrust into the leadership role, a bit like being handed the keys to a sports car when all you'd driven before was a go-kart. Zheng Jing inherited not just his father's aspirations, but also his problems. The high hopes of maintaining a Ming loyalist bastion were now his burden, and let's just say his grip on the steering wheel was a bit shaky. Chaos, as you might imagine, was quick to pounce. Zheng Chenggong's death left a leadership void that was ripe for internal squabbles and power struggles. Imagine a group of cats suddenly realizing their alpha has vanished. There's a lot of hissing, clawing, and general mayhem. The once unified front of Ming loyalists began to fracture as factions vied for control, each with its own vision for the future. Zheng Jing's leadership was constantly challenged, not only by his own officials, but also by the ever-looming threat of the Qing dynasty. Speaking of the Qing, they were not the kind to miss an opportunity. With Zheng's death, they saw a chance to tighten their grip on power and reclaim Taiwan, which they viewed as a rogue province rather than a legitimate kingdom. The Qing dynasty, with its vast resources and well-organized military, was like a steamroller eyeing a speed bump. In 1683, just over 2 decades after Zheng Chenggong's daring capture of Taiwan, the Qing launched a full-scale military campaign to bring the island back under imperial control. The Qing conquest of Taiwan wasn't just a matter of military might. It was about reasserting authority and quashing any remnants of Ming defiance. The Qing Emperor, Kangxi, was determined to solidify his rule and demonstrate that no pocket of resistance, however romanticized, could stand against the might of his empire. The conquest was swift and decisive, a testament to the king's military and logistical prowess. By the end of 1683, Taiwan was firmly under Qing control, and the dream of a Ming revival had been snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. So, what about Zheng Chenggong's legacy? Here lies the fascinating contradiction of history. On one hand, he's celebrated as a national hero, a symbol of resistance against foreign powers and a champion of Chinese sovereignty. Statues of Zheng still stand in various parts of China and Taiwan, casting their bronze gaze over the lands he once sought to unite. He's a folk hero, the kind of figure whose exploits are recounted in songs and stories, often with a touch of embellishment for dramatic flair. On the other hand, Zheng's legacy as a pirate king isn't easily ignored. His rise to power was rooted in the very piracy that he later turned against the king. His exploits on the high seas were as much about plunder as they were about patriotism, a fact that tends to get glossed over in the more sanitized versions of his story. The romantic image of Zheng as a naval genius often overlooks the harsher realities of his actions, the economic burdens he imposed, and the political turmoil that followed his death. And then there's the enduring myth of Zheng Chenggong. Like all great historical figures, his life has been woven into the tapestry of myth and legend, each thread adding a layer of intrigue. In some tales, he's portrayed as a swashbuckling hero, a Chinese Robin Hood of the seas. In others, he's a tragic figure, a leader whose dream of restoring the Ming was ultimately dashed by forces beyond his control. These myths, while far from the gritty truth, have a curious way of shaping cultural identity and national pride. The appeal of the Zheng Chenggong legend lies in its narrative arc. It's a story of ambition, courage, and defiance against the odds. It's the kind of tale that resonates across generations, offering a romanticized version of history that glosses over the complexities and contradictions. In a way, it's a reflection of our own desire for heroes who embody the ideals we hold dear, even if the reality is more nuanced. The legacy of Zheng Chenggong serves as a poignant reminder of how history often prefers legends over facts. We crave stories of heroism and sacrifice, tales of individuals who dared to dream big and challenge the status quo. Yet, beneath the surface of these narratives lies the messy, complicated reality, one where ambition and pragmatism collide, where ideals are tested by the harsh winds of political and economic necessity. In the end, Zheng Chenggong's story is both a testament to the power of myth and a cautionary tale about the complexities of leadership. His life was a whirlwind of adventure and ambition, a high-stakes drama that played out on the turbulent seas of 17th-century Asia. As we close the book on his saga, let's remember that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we record. Zheng Chenggong may have been a pirate, a patriot, and a pioneering leader, but above all, he was a man whose legacy continues to ripple through the pages of history, reminding us of the delicate dance between myth and reality. Ah, the life of a Roman gladiator. It sounds glamorous, doesn't it? The cheering crowds, the glint of sunlight on polished armor, the chance to become a hero of the arena. But hold your horses, or should I say your chariots. This isn't Hollywood. It's 105 BCE, and you're about to find out that the path to gladiatorial fame is more sweat, blood, and economic strategy than glory and honor. You see, the whole gladiator scene didn't just pop into existence because some Roman bigwig thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to watch people fight to the death? Oh no, there's a lot more to it than that. We're talking about a concoction of political maneuvering, economic gain, and public entertainment all wrapped in a toga of spectacle. First, let's get the timeline straight. Around 105 BCE, just as Rome was flexing its imperial muscles, gladiator schools started cropping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Why? Because these games weren't just about the thrill of combat. They were about power and prestige. The politicians of the day knew that if they wanted to win the hearts and votes of the Roman populace, they needed to put on a good show. And nothing said vote for me, quite like a spectacular gladiatorial contest. Now, here's where the economics kick in. Training a gladiator wasn't a cheap affair. We're talking about a significant investment. Picture this. Each gladiator required more than 3,000 sesterces just to get battle-ready. That's not pocket change. To put it in perspective, a Roman legionary, a full-time soldier, earned about 900 sesterces a year. So you're sinking 3 times a soldier's annual salary into a single gladiator. Why such a hefty price tag? Because these guys weren't just brawlers. They were highly trained, specialized warriors. Think of it as mixing a bit of MMA training with some Cirque du Soleil flair. And who were these would-be warriors? Spoiler alert. They weren't a bunch of romantic nobodies volunteering for a chance at eternal glory. The majority were enslaved individuals, prisoners of war, or criminals. Yes, there were some free men who willingly signed up, lured by the promise of fame and fortune, but they were the exception, not the rule. Most gladiators were coerced into the arena by the harsh realities of Roman society, either fight or face a fate even less appealing. But let's not kid ourselves. The myth of the noble gladiator is catchy, and it's easy to see why. Who doesn't love an underdog story? Yet, the reality was far grimmer. Enslaved or imprisoned men were thrust into a brutal world where survival was anything but guaranteed. And the Romans, they ate it up, quite literally, like popcorn at a modern-day movie theater. The gladiator schools themselves were more like military boot camps than sports academies. They were called ludi, and they were run by a Lannister, a sort of manager-cum-disciplinarian who ensured that the gladiators were in top fighting form. But unlike your friendly neighborhood gym, these ludi were places where the stakes were life and death. The Lannister wasn't just prepping you for your next match, he was prepping you to stay alive. It was a rigorous regime, designed to turn you from a regular Joe, or let's face it, a not-so-regular one, into a finely tuned fighting machine. So why did the Romans invest so heavily in these blood-soaked spectacles? Well, apart from the obvious entertainment value, there was a deeper economic and political motive. Gladiator games were a way to keep the masses entertained and distracted from the everyday drudgeries of life. Bread and circuses, as the phrase goes, keep the people fed and entertained, and they're less likely to revolt against the powers that be. Plus, for the wealthy elite, these games were a chance to flaunt their riches and influence. Sponsoring a lavish set of games was a surefire way to boost your social standing and political clout. It was all about the Benjamins, or rather, the Sesterces. At the end of the day, the gladiatorial games were a masterful blend of sport, politics, and economics. It was a business, a brutal business, but a business nonetheless. As you stand in the sandals of a Roman gladiator in training, the arena is your office, the crowd your clients, and every fight is a pitch for survival. The romanticized vision of the gladiator as a noble warrior seeking honor and glory, that's just a clever marketing ploy. In reality, it was all about survival, surviving the training, surviving the fights, and if you played your cards right, maybe even surviving long enough to win your freedom. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You've got a lot of training ahead before you can even dream of that. So, next time you hear someone waxing lyrical about the glory of ancient Rome, just remember, behind every gladiator's helmet was a person trapped in a system that valued spectacle over human life. It was a world where the price of entertainment was often paid in blood, and where the line between life and death was as thin as the edge of a sword. Welcome to the life of a Roman gladiator, where every breath is a gamble and every match could be your last. So, gladiatorial life, less Spartacus and more Survivor, Colosseum edition. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty, the daily grind that made these fighters the ancient world's version of reality TV stars. And trust me, it was no walk in the Roman park. First up, training. Picture a boot camp where the stakes are a tad higher than getting yelled at by a drill sergeant. We're talking about a regimen that would make even the toughest modern athletes break a sweat. The Lannister, your ever-loving trainer-cum-warden, wasn't there to hold your hand. His job, mold you from a common soul into a lean, mean fighting machine. But we're not talking about your standard push-ups and squats. Oh no, this was a full-blown transformation. Training started at the crack of dawn, and it was brutal. Gladiators practiced with wooden swords, heavier than the real deal to build muscle and endurance. Sounds like fun, right? Imagine swinging a 15-pound stick around for hours. It's like CrossFit on steroids, minus the Instagram selfies. The goal. When you finally picked up a real sword, it felt like a feather, and you could swing it with the grace of a lethal dancer. And let's not forget about the physical conditioning. Running, jumping, dodging, it was all part of the game. These guys were trained to be as agile as they were strong. They needed to be quick on their feet, because let's face it, the last thing you wanted was to be caught flat-footed by a fellow with a gladius. It was a full-body workout, the ancient version of HIIT, with a little more blood and a lot more guts. But even the toughest regimen needs fuel, right? Enter the gladiator diet. Surprisingly, it wasn't just about scarfing down a leg of lamb and calling it a day. No, these guys were on a high-carb diet. Think barley, beans, and the Roman equivalent of protein shakes. The aim was to build a layer of fat. Sounds counterintuitive for a fighter. Not really. That extra padding was like an ancient version of body armor, protecting vital organs from a well-aimed thrust. So next time someone tells you carbs are evil, just remember, They might save your life in the arena. All this training and dieting didn't come without its perks, though. Gladiators had access to medical care that was actually better than what the average Roman received. Yep, the powers that needed their investments to stay alive, or at least in fighting condition. So, if you got a nasty cut or a broken bone, the medics were on it like ancient doctors. A bandage here, a bit of herbal poultice there, and you were patched up for another round of Who Wants to Survive a Gladiator match. But let's not gloss over the harsh discipline. The Lannister was more than just a trainer, he was the jailer and the judge. Rules were strict, and punishment was swift. Step out of line, and you'd face a range of consequences, from a few lashes to a stint in solitary confinement. It was a world where obedience wasn't just expected, it was enforced with an iron fist, sometimes quite literally. Now, onto society's double-edged sword of admiration and disdain for these warriors. On the one hand, gladiators were the celebrities of their day. Crowds cheered for them, artists painted them, and poets wrote odes to their bravery. But on the flip side, they were also considered lowly, barely a step above slaves. It was a bizarre love-hate relationship, akin to how we view reality TV stars today. Admired for their prowess, yet scorned for their status. The Roman elite attended games to see their favorite fighters, but would never dream of inviting one over for dinner. They were the ultimate guilty pleasure, celebrated on the battlefield, yet shunned in daily life. This paradox extended even to the gladiators themselves. Some reveled in the attention, relishing their moment in the spotlight. Others despised their existence, longing for a life beyond the arena's confines. But no matter their personal feelings, when the trumpet sounded, they donned their helmets and faced whatever fate had in store. It was a life of constant tension between glory and survival, where every match could propel you to fame or end in a swift, bloody demise. In the end, the life of a gladiator was a brutal, complex dance with death, one that balanced societal fascination with the grim realities of existence on the edge. It's an irony as sharp as the swords they wielded. These men lived lives dictated by a system that both revered and reviled them. The very society that cheered their names was the same one that kept them shackled to the whims of the sand and the sword. But hey, who said life, or history, is fair? Keep your helmets on, folks, because there's more to come in this saga of sweat, blood, and the relentless pursuit of survival. And speaking of the relentless pursuit of survival, let's dive into the colorful cast of characters that made the Roman arena a veritable buffet of fighting styles and flair. Forget your one-size-fits-all warrior. Gladiators were as varied as the items on a Roman banquet menu. From the heavily armored Murmillo to the swift-footed Retiarius, each type brought its own signature moves and equipment to the blood-soaked stage. Take the Murmillo, for instance. These guys were the tanks of the gladiatorial world, decked out with a broad-brimmed helmet adorned with a fish motif, because why not add a little aquatic flair to your life-or-death struggle? They wielded a gladius, the short sword that was the Swiss army knife of the Roman military. Add a large, rectangular shield, and you've got yourself a walking fortress. But let's not kid ourselves. All that armor came at a cost. The Murmillo was about as nimble as a tortoise in a tudu, relying on brute strength and defensive prowess to win the day. In the opposite corner, meet the Retiarius, the gladiatorial equivalent of a modern-day track star with a penchant for fishing. Armed with a trident and a weighted net, they wore minimal armor, just a shoulder guard called a gallerus, leaving much of their body exposed. The Retiarius danced around the arena, aiming to ensnare their opponents in the net before delivering a well-timed thrust with the trident. It was a strategy that required speed, precision, and a flair for the dramatic. Think of them as the matadors of the Roman world, minus the bullfighting and plus a lot more human peril. And let's not forget the secutor, designed specifically to take on the Retiarius. These gladiators sported smoother helmets with small eye holes to prevent nets from snagging. It was a classic cat-and-mouse game, with the secutor relentlessly pursuing the Retiarius, hoping to close the distance and make that armor count. The tension between the two styles was like watching a chess match where one wrong move could be your last. Now, let's add some spice to this already zesty mix. The Threeks. Armed with a curved sword known as a seeker and a small shield, they were the gladiatorial embodiment of agility. The Threeks danced in and out of their opponent's reach, looking for an opening to strike. Their helmets bore a griffin crest, because if you're gonna fight, you might as well look fabulous doing it. But here's the kicker. These matches weren't just random pairings of gladiators thrown into the ring like an ancient reality show. Oh no, this was a carefully curated spectacle. The matchups were designed to highlight contrasting styles, making each fight a dynamic dance of strategy and skill. It was like a chess match with swords, and the audience, they were the grandmasters, cheering every calculated move and thrilling reversal. Yet, beyond the glamour and drama, these fights were also about cold, hard cash and political capital. Gladiatorial games were big business, and each fight was a transaction in a currency of blood and spectacle. Wealthy sponsors, often politicians looking to curry favor with the masses, footed the bill. The cost of staging these games could run into the millions of sesterces, a hefty sum even by Roman standards. But the payback, a stadium full of adoring citizens who might just remember your name come election time. And here's a plot twist that Hollywood often skips. Gladiators didn't always fight to the death. That's right. Despite what the movies might have you believe, these spectacles were more nuanced than a simple kill-or-be-killed scenario. You see, training a gladiator, as we've mentioned, was a costly affair. Losing your star fighter in a bout was akin to watching your stock portfolio go up in flames. Sure, deaths happened, but not every match ended with a body count. Many conflicts concluded with a yield, a decision made by the editor, usually the sponsor of the games. His thumb, either up or down, dictated a fighter's fate, and more often than not, mercy prevailed. The audience's cries for blood were as much about the thrill as they were about the spectacle, but the savvy editor knew the true value lay in keeping a skilled gladiator alive for another day, another fight, another chance to draw in the crowds and their coin. It was a delicate dance of drama and pragmatism, a balance between satisfying the bloodlust of the masses and the economic realities of the arena. So, the next time you picture a gladiatorial match, remember this. It was less a death sentence and more a high-stakes performance with real-life consequences. It was a world where every move was a gamble, every strike a calculated risk, and every victory a step closer to, potentially, freedom. Gladiators were the ultimate performers, caught in a web of societal expectations, economic pressures, and the ever-present shadow of mortality. But don't hang up your helmet just yet. We've still got plenty of ground to cover in this tale of grit and glory. From the iconic venues that housed these spectacles to the social dynamics that played out both inside and outside the arena, this story's not over. So steel yourself, because the sands of history have more secrets to reveal, and they are as thrilling as any blockbuster. Stay tuned. But let's move from the sands of the arena to the heart of the Roman Empire, the Colosseum. This architectural marvel wasn't just a stadium. It was a political chessboard where emperors played elaborate games of power and influence. The Colosseum, or Flavian Amphitheater as it was officially known, wasn't built just to give the Roman populace a weekend thrill. No, it was the ultimate PR stunt. Imagine the grand opening in 80 AD under Emperor Titus, an event that made the Super Bowl halftime show look like amateur hour. You see, the Colosseum was a political tool, a stone-and-mortar reminder of the emperor's might and generosity. Providing free entertainment for up to 50,000 spectators, it was the ancient equivalent of promising free Wi-Fi in every Roman home. What better way to ensure your popularity than by gifting the masses a spectacle of epic proportions? But don't let the grandeur fool you into thinking it was all smiles and thumbs up. Behind the facade of public enjoyment lay a darker narrative. Gladiator games were the ancient world's version of bread and circuses, a strategy to pacify the populace. Keep them entertained, and maybe they won't notice the empire's problems or your latest tax hike. Now, the games were more than just a bloodbath. They were a social event where everyone, from the lowliest plebeian to the loftiest patrician, gathered under one roof. It was a rare moment of unity in a deeply stratified society. Yet, don't get too misty-eyed. The seating arrangement was a stark reminder of Rome's rigid social hierarchy. The closer you were to the action, the higher your status. And let's not forget the emperor's box, a throne of power where the ruler could watch the spectacle unfold while basking in the adulation of the crowd. Speaking of emperors, let's talk about their role in all this. Picture them as the directors of this grand production, wielding immense influence over the games. They could decide life or death with a mere gesture, and their presence added a layer of gravitas to the proceedings. But let's be real, it was also a chance for them to bolster their image. Hosting games was a way to remind everyone who was in charge, a not-so-subtle display of benevolent authority. And while the games were a hit with the masses, not everyone was a fan. Enter Seneca, the famed Stoic philosopher, who took a rather dim view of the whole affair. In his letters, Seneca railed against the brutality of the games, condemning them as a waste of human life. He saw the spectacle for what it was, a reflection of society's moral decay, a critique that wouldn't feel out of place in today's debates about violent entertainment. Seneca's stance was a reminder that not all Romans were swept up in the fervor of bloodlust. Some, like him, questioned the morality of such displays, much like how we debate the ethics of modern-day sports and entertainment. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Despite the moral condemnation, the games thrived. Why? Because they tapped into a primal part of human nature, a fascination with violence and spectacle. It's the same reason why action movies and competitive sports draw millions today. The adrenaline, the drama, the thrill of watching two combatants go toe-to-toe. It's an age-old allure that's as potent now as it was then. But beyond the entertainment factor, these games also served as a pressure valve for societal tensions. They provided a space where grievances could be forgotten, if only temporarily. In a city teeming with people from diverse backgrounds and conflicting interests, the Colosseum was a unifying force. It was a place where the rich and powerful rubbed shoulders with the common folk, all cheering for the same outcome. It was a powerful reminder that despite the divisions, they were all Romans at heart. Yet, let's not gloss over the grim reality. The games were a spectacle of human suffering, where lives were bought and sold for the amusement of the crowd. Enslaved gladiators, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals were forced to fight for their survival. It was a brutal reminder of the disposability of human life in the face of entertainment. The crowd's cries for blood were a chilling testament to the darker side of human nature, a side that revels in the suffering of others. And as we delve deeper into the cultural impact of these games, it's important to remember their dual nature. On one hand, they were a testament to Roman engineering and organizational prowess, a display of power and unity. On the other, they were a stark reflection of a society that glorified violence and exploitation. It's a complex legacy, one that continues to resonate in our discussions about the ethics of entertainment and the value of human life. So, as we explore the cultural tapestry of ancient Rome, let's keep in mind the lessons it offers. The Colosseum wasn't just a monument to gladiatorial combat. It was a mirror reflecting the society that built it. It was a stage where the drama of human existence played out in all its glory and horror, offering a glimpse into the soul of a civilization that, despite its grandeur, was as flawed and conflicted as any other. And as we continue this journey through the sands of history, let's remember that the stories we tell, of heroism, of struggle, of survival, are as much about us as they are about the past. The next time you find yourself captivated by a tale of ancient glory, remember, behind every legend lies a story of human ambition, folly, and the eternal quest for meaning. Stay tuned, because the arena of history has more fights left to reveal. But as with all things that shine too brightly, the gladiatorial games eventually flickered and faded. The decline of these spectacles wasn't a single dramatic upheaval, but more of a slow, inevitable fizzle, a drawn-out epilogue to centuries of bloody drama. So, what caused the curtain to drop on Rome's most infamous pastime? Well, pull up a seat, because it's a cocktail of economic woes, societal shifts, and a smattering of religious fervor that finally put the kibosh on gladiators. First up, let's talk cash, or rather, the lack of it. By the time we hit the 3rd and 4th centuries, Rome's economy was on the rocks, and not the kind you'd order at a bar. We're talking inflation, debased currency, and a treasury that was hemorrhaging faster than a wounded Retiarius. Funding lavish games was a luxury fewer could afford, and those who could were starting to ask if a temporary boost in popularity was worth the hefty price tag. Remember those millions of sesterces it took to put on a good show? Yeah, not exactly pocket change when the empire is teetering on the brink of financial chaos. But it wasn't just the purse strings tightening. Society was evolving, and the appetite for blood sports was waning. The gladiatorial games, once the pinnacle of entertainment, began to feel a little too much like a relic of a bygone era. Romans were getting their kicks in new ways: chariot races, theatre, and even the emerging sport of animal hunts, which, while still brutal, didn't carry the same human cost. There was a shift in what the public wanted to see, and gladiators were slowly being nudged out of the limelight. And then came the real game-changer: religion. Enter Christianity, stage left, with a set of values that didn't exactly jive with the whole watch people fight to the death for fun ethos. As Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, its leaders began to wield more influence, and their disapproval of the games was no secret. In a world where turning the other cheek was gaining traction over slicing it open, the moral tide was turning against the arena. The final blow came in 404 CE, when Emperor Honorius decided enough was enough. The legend has it that a monk named Telemachus tried to stop a fight in the arena, only to be stoned to death by the crowd for his troubles. Whether the story is entirely accurate or not, what's clear is that Honorius was moved to ban the games shortly after. It was the end of an era, marked not by the roar of the crowd, but by the quiet closing of a chapter in history. So, what remains of the gladiators today? Well, quite a bit, actually. Their legacy is as indelible as the scars they bore. In modern culture, gladiators are larger-than-life figures, immortalized in films, TV shows, and even video games. Think of classics like Spartacus and Gladiator, or the countless digital warriors battling it out on our screens. They've become symbols of bravery, rebellion, and the eternal struggle against impassable odds. The romantic allure of the gladiator persists, a testament to their enduring mythos. But here's the kicker: as with many legends, the reality is far more nuanced. The truth about gladiators is a tale of exploitation and survival, a sobering reminder of the lengths to which societies will go for entertainment. Behind the Hollywood sheen lies a history of human suffering, economic manipulation, and social control. It's a potent mix that resonates with us, perhaps because it reflects our own complexities and contradictions. In the end, the gladiatorial games were a microcosm of the Roman world, its grandeur, its brutality, and its ultimate fragility. They remind us that beneath the veneer of civilization lies a primal fascination with violence, a fascination that has persisted through the ages. But they also offer a glimpse into human resilience, the capacity to endure and adapt in the face of overwhelming adversity. So, as we draw the curtain on the story of the gladiators, let's remember them not just as warriors of the arena, but as a reflection of the society that created them. Their legacy is a mirror, showing us both the beauty and the darkness of human nature. It's a story that continues to captivate, a testament to the power of myth and the enduring allure of history's harsh realities. And as we turn the page, let's take with us the lessons of the past, a reminder of the complex dance between legend and truth. Because, in the end, it's not just about the stories we tell, but what those stories reveal about who we are. Amidst the cacophony of ancient Alexandria, think of it as the New York City of the 4th century, where the buzz wasn't from traffic, but from bustling markets, philosophical debates, and a fair share of donkey brays. Hypatia made her mark. Now, if you're picturing pyramids, you've got the wrong idea. Alexandria was a metropolitan marvel, a true melting pot, where Greek, Roman, Jewish, and Egyptian influences mingled like the ingredients of a particularly complex stew. It was here, in this vibrant hub of intellect and culture, that Hypatia emerged as a beacon of knowledge. Let's dive into the world of Hypatia, shall we? Born around 360 AD, Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher, which is as close as you could get to being born with a silver abacus in your mouth. Theon wasn't just any dad. He was the last known member of the Library of Alexandria, a place so legendary it puts our modern libraries to shame. Imagine a collection of scrolls, over 400,000 of them, covering everything from astrology to zoology. In short, scrolls were the Netflix of their day, offering endless options for the curious mind. The Library of Alexandria was more than just a building with books. It was the intellectual equivalent of Hogwarts, minus the magic wands. Scholars from all over the Mediterranean flocked to this place, eager to exchange ideas and occasionally argue about them too. This was where Hypatia honed her skills, making her not just a scholar but a symbol of knowledge. She walked the halls where legends like Euclid and Archimedes once strolled or paced about in deep thought, as mathematicians are wont to do. Now, let's address the elephant in the scroll room: women in ancient academia. It's tempting to romanticize the past, imagining Hypatia as part of an enlightened society where female scholars were as common as philosophers with beards. But reality, as usual, is a bit more sobering. Hypatia was a rarity. While women did participate in intellectual life, their roles were often limited and overshadowed by their male counterparts. Hypatia, however, wasn't just an exception. She was the exception, a brilliant mind in a toga who lectured on mathematics and philosophy to packed audiences. Her education was nothing short of rigorous. Guided by her father, she delved into mathematics, astronomy, and the intricacies of Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that could make modern-day philosophy professors reach for their Advil. She surpassed her father's teachings, becoming a renowned thinker in her own right. Hypatia's lectures were the TED talks of her time, drawing students from far and wide, eager to learn from this intellectual powerhouse. Let's not sugarcoat it. Being a scholar in ancient Alexandria wasn't all about profound discussions and eureka moments. The city was a hotbed of political tension and religious strife, with factions as divisive as a modern-day Twitter feud. Hypatia navigated this tumultuous landscape with a grace that would make a trapeze artist envious. She maintained a careful balance, engaging with people from various religious and philosophical backgrounds without getting tangled in their disputes. To give you an idea of her impact, one of her students, Synesius of Cyrene, later became a bishop and wrote to Hypatia, seeking her advice on everything from philosophical dilemmas to the practicalities of making an astrolabe, a sort of ancient GPS, minus the voice telling you to turn left at the next pyramid. Yet, despite her accomplishments, Hypatia's story isn't all scrolls and roses. The harsh reality of her time was that intellectual pursuits were often overshadowed by political and religious turmoil. Alexandria, with its great library and cultural wealth, was also a city of contrasts, where enlightenment coexisted with ignorance and reason with fanaticism. Hypatia's life and legacy remind us that the pursuit of knowledge has always been fraught with challenges, but in her case, it was also marked by an enduring brilliance that transcends the centuries. Hypatia's brilliance was like a comet streaking across Alexandria's sky, a sight to behold, but oh so rare. As a mathematician and astronomer, she didn't just tiptoe around the male-dominated scholarly circles. She danced right through them, challenging norms with every theorem and lecture. Let's talk sharp. Hypatia's contributions to mathematics were as revolutionary as they were, well, brain-bending. First, let's tackle her work with Diophantus's *Arithmetica*. This wasn't light bedtime reading, folks. *Arithmetica* was a collection of problems dealing with algebra. Yes, algebra, that thing we all pretended to understand in high school. Diophantus, often called the father of algebra, laid the groundwork for equations that modern mathematicians are still untangling today. Hypatia, with her astute intellect, contributed to its commentaries, elucidating and expanding upon his work. Her insights weren't just footnotes in the margin. They were significant enhancements that helped solidify algebra's foundation. Then there's her work with the astrolabe. Picture this: an ancient device, part GPS, part clock, part astrological chart, like your phone, but without the social media distractions. The astrolabe was essential for navigation and astronomy, a tool that could map the heavens, and if you were lucky, prevent you from sailing off the edge of the known world. Hypatia didn't invent the astrolabe, but her enhancements and teachings on its use were pivotal. She transformed it from a mysterious contraption that only the geekiest of scholars could appreciate into a practical tool for navigation and astronomy. Imagine being able to pinpoint your position using the stars, a skill that made you the party's MVP, especially if that party was on a ship in the middle of the Mediterranean. Now, let's dig into the dynamics of ancient scholarly debates. If you think modern academic squabbles or Twitter spats get heated, you haven't seen anything. In Hypatia's time, intellectual discourse was a full-contact sport, minus the helmets. Philosophers and mathematicians engaged in debates that were part intellectual exercise, part theatrical performance. Picture a room full of toga-clad scholars, gesticulating wildly, arguing over the nature of the cosmos like it was the latest plot twist in a soap opera. Hypatia was no stranger to these debates, often finding herself in the intellectual crossfire. Her calm demeanor and sharp wit were her weapons of choice. She could dismantle an opponent's argument with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. However, these scholarly jousts weren't merely about ego. They were the crucible in which new ideas were forged and tested. Hypatia's ability to navigate these debates was a testament to her intellectual prowess and her diplomatic skills that were as necessary as they were rare for a woman in her position. But let's not sugarcoat the intellectual climate of Alexandria. The city's academic scene, while vibrant, was fraught with political and religious undercurrents that could derail a career faster than you could say hypotenuse. Hypatia's contemporaries weren't just fellow scholars. They were also political players, religious figures, and occasionally fanatics. It was a high-stakes environment where alliances shifted like sand dunes, and where the wrong word in the wrong ear could spell disaster. Hypatia's brilliance shone not only in her academic achievements, but also in her ability to navigate this perilous landscape. She maintained relationships with influential figures from various factions, including Orsts, the Roman governor of Alexandria, and Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, who were about as compatible as oil and water. She was a bridge between worlds, a mediator in a time when mediation often involved more than a sternly worded letter. The legend of Hypatia, as romantic as it is, often overlooks the gritty reality of her world. She was a trailblazer, yes, but not in a world eager to be blazed. Her achievements were not just about breaking glass ceilings. They were about surviving in a world that wasn't quite ready to accept a woman's brilliance. And while her story is often told with a tragic bent, focusing on her untimely death, it's her life, her work, her resilience, her intellect that truly defines her legacy. In the end, Hypatia was not just a scholar. She was a symbol of intellectual freedom, a reminder that knowledge knows no gender, no boundaries. Her contributions to mathematics and astronomy laid the groundwork for future generations, influencing scholars long after the dust of her time had settled. Stay tuned, because the tale of Hypatia doesn't end here. There's more to uncover about this remarkable figure and the world she navigated, a world as complex and captivating as the equations she loved. With Hypatia's life showcasing the brilliance of intellectual freedom, let's dial the time machine to the Alexandria of her later years, where the political and religious tensions were as thick as a loaf of Egyptian bread. You see, by the time Hypatia was making waves, Alexandria was less about philosophical harmony and more about factional brawls with a side of riot. This wasn't just a city of thinkers. It was a pressure cooker of ideologies ready to explode. The 4th and 5th centuries were a transformative time for the Roman Empire, which was starting to resemble a grand old ship taking on water. Christianity, once a humble cult meeting in catacombs, had become the empire's official religion in 380 AD, thanks to Emperor Theodosius I's decree. Imagine that, a seismic shift in spiritual allegiance, like switching from vinyl to Spotify overnight, but with a lot more incense and considerably fewer playlists. This newfound dominance of Christianity didn't mean everyone was singing hymns in perfect harmony. Oh no, it was more like a cacophony of theological debates, each more heated than the last. Alexandria was home to a particularly volatile blend of religious fervor and old pagan traditions. On one side, we had the Christians, who were about as subtle as a chariot race in a library, eager to spread their faith and consolidate power. On the other, the pagans, who clung to their gods and philosophical traditions like shipwreck survivors to driftwood. Hypatia, a devoted Neoplatonist and daughter of the Hellenistic tradition, was caught in the middle of this divine tug-of-war. The city itself was like a grand Colosseum, with each religious faction vying for the emperor's favor. The Christians, led by figures like Cyril, the bishop of Alexandria, were particularly adept at playing this game of power. Cyril was not your average bishop. Think of him more as a political operator in a clerical robe. He wielded influence with the precision of a maestro, conducting a particularly unruly orchestra. And then there was Orsts, the Roman governor of Alexandria, a man tasked with keeping the peace, a job that made juggling flaming torches look easy. Orsts and Cyril were like oil and water, constantly at odds, with Hypatia stuck in the middle, trying to pour reason onto the flames. She was a trusted advisor to Orsts, a role that put her squarely in the crosshairs of those who saw her as a pagan threat. Now, let's not pretend Hypatia was some passive bystander in this religious and political drama. She was a prominent intellectual and a symbol of the old ways. Her very existence was a challenge to the new Christian order. In a world where symbols held as much power as swords, Hypatia was a particularly potent one, representing a golden age of learning that the Christians were eager to sweep aside. But before you start thinking of Hypatia as a crusader against Christianity, it's important to note that she wasn't anti-Christian. Far from it. Her circle included many Christians, and she engaged with them in discussions that were as intellectually rigorous as they were cordial. However, her association with Orsts and her refusal to convert made her an easy target for Cyril and his followers. The tension reached a boiling point in 415 AD. It was a year that would go down in history, not for its philosophical breakthroughs, but for the brutal murder of Hypatia, a grim reminder that knowledge often comes at a high price. The details of her death are as murky as the Nile in flood season. What's clear is that she was attacked by a mob, possibly incited by Cyril's followers, who saw her as a symbol of pagan resistance. In a horrific act, Hypatia was dragged from her chariot, stripped, and brutally murdered. Her body was then mutilated, a grim spectacle that underscored the chaos of the times. The tragic irony of Hypatia's death is that it wasn't just the end of a brilliant mind. It was a symbol of the intellectual darkness that was creeping over Alexandria. Her murder sent shockwaves through the city, chilling reminder that the pursuit of knowledge was a dangerous endeavor in a world governed by fear and fanaticism. Yet, while her death marked a dark chapter in Alexandria's history, the legacy of her life continued to shine. Hypatia became a martyr, not just for pagan causes, but for intellectual freedom and the pursuit of knowledge. Her story, though tragic, has been retold for centuries, a beacon to those who dare to think differently, to challenge the status quo. Her life serves as a testament to the enduring power of ideas and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. As we delve deeper into the tangled threads of Hypatia's world, we see a society in flux, wrestling with change, and often failing to manage the fallout. It's a tale as old as time, a reminder that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex web of human desires, fears, and ambitions. In our next exploration, we'll continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of Alexandria, a city that stood at the crossroads of history, forever changed by the lives and deaths of its inhabitants. So stay with us as we journey further into this captivating saga, where the lines between myth and reality blur, and where the echoes of the past still resonate in our world today. And so, as we peel back the layers of Alexandria's vibrant past, we find ourselves face to face with the legendary figure of Hypatia, a woman whose life and death have been as hotly debated as the latest plot twist in a hit TV series. But before we dive into the murky waters of myth and reality, let's take a moment to appreciate why her story has endured for centuries. You see, Hypatia wasn't just a scholar. She was a symbol, a figurehead for knowledge and reason in an era that was increasingly hostile to both. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, Hypatia's death. It's the stuff of legends, quite literally. You've got mob violence, political intrigue, religious fervor, all the makings of a Hollywood blockbuster. But what really happened on those fateful streets of Alexandria? Well, that's where things get a bit cloudy, like trying to watch a 3D movie without the glasses. Enter Socrates, Scholasticus, and Damasius, two historians who couldn't agree on what color the sky was, let alone the details of Hypatia's demise. Socrates Scholasticus, a Christian historian writing in the 5th century, gave us a version of events that reads like a cautionary tale. According to him, a group of Christian zealots, led by a character named Peter the Reader, attacked Hypatia, dragging her from her chariot and brutally murdering her. Socrates doesn't mince words. He pins the blame squarely on Cyril's followers, painting Hypatia as a martyr for pagan wisdom in a city where religious tensions were simmering like a cauldron on a bonfire. Then there's Damasius, writing about a century later, who adds his own flair to the narrative. Damasius was a pagan philosopher, so you can imagine he had a bit of an agenda. His account is even more dramatic, rife with vivid details of Hypatia's intellect and her tragic fate. In Damasius's eyes, Hypatia was a shining beacon of Hellenistic learning, snuffed out by barbaric ignorance. His version is less about facts and more about crafting a narrative that would tug at the heartstrings of anyone who valued knowledge and wisdom. So, what's true and what's fiction? The truth, as is often the case, lies somewhere in the grey area between these two accounts. We know Hypatia was murdered in 415 AD, and we know it was a politically charged act. But was it as grandiose as the historians would have us believe? Probably not. The reality was likely less of a grand spectacle and more of a tragic, senseless act of violence in a city that was a powder keg of ideological conflict. Yet, it's the very ambiguity of Hypatia's death that has fueled her legend. The drama, the injustice, the sheer audacity of her murder, all these elements have combined to turn Hypatia into a symbol, not just of the dangers of fanaticism, but of the enduring power of ideas. Her life became a canvas onto which people projected their hopes, fears, and ideals, transforming her into a larger-than-life figure whose story resonated across the centuries. In the grand tapestry of history, Hypatia's legend grew because it served a purpose. For pagans, she was a martyr to their lost world. For Christians, eventually, she became a cautionary tale of unchecked zeal. And for later thinkers, she was an icon of intellectual freedom, a reminder of what can be lost when ignorance triumphs over reason. Her story was retold and reimagined, each generation adding its own brushstrokes to the portrait, until the real woman was all but obscured by the myth. But let's not lose sight of the economic and political realities that shaped Hypatia's world. Alexandria was the economic hub of the Roman Empire, a city where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the Nile. The city's wealth was a magnet for power struggles, and its diverse population was a recipe for conflict. The rise of Christianity wasn't just a spiritual revolution, it was a socio-political one, a shift in the balance of power that left many feeling threatened and marginalized. Hypatia's death was a microcosm of these broader changes, a symptom of a society grappling with its own identity. The old order was crumbling, and in its place rose a new one, eager to assert its dominance. In this context, Hypatia's murder wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a seismic event that highlighted the tensions ripping through Alexandria. So, where does this leave us? With a story that's part fact, part fiction, and wholly compelling. Hypatia's legend has endured because it taps into something fundamental about the human experience, our fear of ignorance, our longing for knowledge, and our recognition of the fragility of both. As we move forward in our exploration of her legacy, we'll continue to untangle the threads of her story, separating the myth from the reality, and uncovering what her life and death can teach us about our own world. Stay with us as we delve further into the life of this remarkable woman, exploring how her ideas have echoed through history and why her story continues to captivate us today. There's much more to uncover, and much more to learn from this beacon of Alexandria, whose light shines as brightly now as it did all those centuries ago. So, let's dive into the modern reverberations of Hypatia's legacy, a tale as compelling today as it was in the dusty streets of ancient Alexandria. Picture Hypatia, not as a marble statue gathering dust in the annals of history, but as a living, breathing symbol of intellectual defiance and gender equality that continues to inspire. In a world that often feels like it's spinning faster than a philosopher's head at a Neoplatonism conference, Hypatia's story serves as a touchstone for progress and the pursuit of knowledge. Fast forward to the 21st century, where Hypatia's legacy has been reimagined across various media. From novels to films, her story has been retold, often with a dramatic flair that would make Shakespeare proud. The 2009 film, Agora, starring Rachel Weisz, brought Hypatia's life to the silver screen, painting a vivid picture of the turbulent time she lived in. While the film takes creative liberties, because let's face it, Hollywood never met a fact it couldn't embellish, it captures the essence of Hypatia's struggle against ignorance and fanaticism. Her portrayal as an intellectual heroine resonates in a world still grappling with similar issues, echoing the age-old fight between enlightenment and dogma. But beyond the glitz of Hollywood, Hypatia's impact is palpable in more concrete realms. Consider the realms of science and education, where her legacy as a pioneering woman has left an indelible mark. In an era when women's rights are still a hot-button issue, Hypatia's story offers both inspiration and cautionary lessons. She represents the untapped potential of countless women whose contributions have been overlooked or marginalized. When you think about it, Hypatia is the original poster child for gender equality in academia, a reminder that brilliance knows no gender, just as good ideas aren't the exclusive domain of one demographic. In the world of science, Hypatia's legacy is celebrated through initiatives aimed at empowering women in STEM fields. Organizations like Hypatia Women in Science, named in her honor, work tirelessly to provide platforms for women to break into historically male-dominated areas. These initiatives highlight a critical truth. The more diverse the voices in scientific discourse, the richer and more innovative the outcomes. Hypatia's life serves as a rallying cry for inclusivity, urging us to dismantle barriers that prevent talent from flourishing, no matter where it originates. Now, let's pivot to the domain of education. Hypatia's role as a teacher in ancient Alexandria was akin to being a rock star professor with a fan base as devoted as those who attend today's TED talks. Her lectures drew students from across the Mediterranean, eager to bask in the glow of her intellect. Fast forward to today, her legacy as an educator underscores the transformative power of teaching. Education remains a catalyst for change, an arena where ideas can ignite revolutions, both personal and societal. Hypatia's story is a testament to the fact that teaching is never just about imparting knowledge. It's about inspiring others to think for themselves, to question the status quo, and to dream beyond the confines of the known. As we reflect on Hypatia's enduring influence, it's worth noting how her story has been deployed as a cultural touchstone. She's been invoked in debates about religious tolerance, intellectual freedom, and the role of women in society. Her life serves as a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dusty tomes. It's a living dialogue that informs our present and shapes our future. The lessons of the past, embodied by figures like Hypatia, challenge us to build a world where knowledge is celebrated, not feared, where diversity is strength, not a liability, and where the pursuit of truth is a shared journey, not a solitary quest. So, what makes Hypatia's story the ultimate comeback tale? It's her ability to transcend time, to speak to our modern sensibilities even as she belonged to a distant past. Hypatia's narrative is the historical equivalent of a phoenix rising from the ashes, a tale of resilience that refuses to be silenced, no matter how many centuries pass. Her legend has grown, not because of embellishment, but because it taps into universal truths about the human condition. Our thirst for knowledge, our struggle against ignorance, and our relentless drive to carve out a meaningful existence in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable. In wrapping up our exploration of Hypatia's legacy, let's remember that history's greatest figures are those who challenge us to think differently, to question our assumptions, and to strive for a better world. Hypatia is more than a historical figure. She's a beacon of hope, a symbol of what can be achieved when intellect and courage intersect. Her story is a call to action, urging us to carry forward the torch of knowledge and to never shy away from the pursuit of truth. As we close the book on our journey through Hypatia's life, let's take with us the wisdom of her legacy, that ideas are powerful, that knowledge is liberating, and that the light of reason will always find a way to shine through the darkest of times. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the human spirit is as resilient as it is curious, and that the quest for understanding is as eternal as time itself.